Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, January 16th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 468 of Israel's genocide in Gaza, in cautious anticipation of a ceasefire process beginning this weekend. Coming up, we'll talk with writer Ahmed Alnaouq about what we know about the details of the ceasefire deal and what comes next in Gaza. We'll also be joined by economic analyst Shir Hever for an update on what is happening within Israeli society and the growing global arms embargo against the genocidal state. And later on in the program, Jon will cover all the latest resistance news from the battle in northern Gaza. But first, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Gaza. Our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, reported that a phased deal had been reached between Israel and Hamas to end the brutal and devastating war, which should go into effect on Sunday. Maureen writes, quote, "The text of the agreement, mediated in part by Qatar, has not been published officially. The Prime Minister of the Gulf state said that the exact terms of the second and third phase have yet to be hammered out by the two parties. Prime Minister Al-Thani said that the first phase of the deal would take place over 42 days and see the release of 33 Israelis held captive in Gaza, both living and dead, and both soldiers and civilians, in exchange for an unspecified number of Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons and detention centers. That phase also includes the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza's populated areas, Al-Thani added, as well as evacuation of the wounded for medical treatment outside of Gaza. Palestinians displaced within Gaza will be able to return will be able to return to their homes during the first phase, Al-Thani said, and there will be a surge in desperately needed humanitarian aid across the territory. The Qatari Prime Minister said that Doha would work closely with Cairo and Washington to guarantee the implementation of the agreement, but that it was up to the parties to fully commit to all three phases, honor their obligations, and reach a lasting ceasefire. For more of Maureen Claire Murphy's report and analysis, read Qatar announces ceasefire deal on electronicintifada.net. And we'll discuss the latest on the deal later on in the program. In the lead up to the ceasefire announcement on Wednesday, and in the hours following, Israel carried out massacres and campaigns of further destruction across the Gaza Strip. Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud reported on Wednesday that, quote, "The more we hear about a potential ceasefire agreement, the higher the pace of the attacks, the more families are being targeted and killed. At least 59 Palestinians were killed in a series of attacks just hours before the deal was reached. And Gaza's civil defense stated that the Israeli military intensified its bombardment of Gaza City right after the ceasefire announcement. In the early hours of Thursday, this morning, journalist Anas al-Sharif reported that 30 Palestinians, including children, were killed in Gaza City a few hours after the ceasefire was announced. Quote, "The Israeli occupation army extinguished this joy," he said. "Israel doesn't want the children, women, and families who have endured this war during the past period to live in peace, safety, and happiness." And the attacks have continued. The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza said earlier this morning that since the ceasefire deal was announced, 72 people have been killed. Early Wednesday morning, Israel bombed a home in Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip, killing 12 people, including a 7-year-old boy and 3 teenagers, according to the Palestinian Civil Defense Corps. Israel also bombed a school shelter in Gaza City and a home in the Burej refugee camp. On Monday, January 13th, a series of Israeli drone strikes killed at least 33 Palestinians across Gaza, including 7 separate attacks on Palestinians in Gaza City. On Tuesday, Israel bombed a shop along the coastal road in Deir al-Balah, which sparked a large fire that, driven by strong sea winds, quickly spread to engulf makeshift displacement encampments, according to the UN. While no casualties were reported, 67 families lost all their belongings as their tents were destroyed in the fire. The Israeli army ordered the further forced displacement of people in Jabalia in northern Gaza on Wednesday. The Gaza government media office stated on January 12th that 100 days have passed since Israel began its targeted campaign of destruction and slaughter in the north, leaving approximately 5,000 Palestinians dead or missing, 9,500 wounded, and 2,600 abducted. Quote, during these 100 days, our Palestinian people in the northern Gaza Strip have experienced the most heinous forms of killing, ethnic cleansing, destruction, and displacement, the media office declared. Quote, the destruction of homes, hospitals, public facilities, and infrastructure clearly exposes the intention of the Israeli occupation to deliberately and systematically eliminate the foundations of life in the Gaza Strip, causing a deep humanitarian crisis that exacerbates the suffering of our honorable Palestinian people. We affirm that our Palestinian people will remain steadfast in the face of this brutal aggression and that the occupation will not succeed in displacing our people and depriving them of their rights. These crimes will only increase our Palestinian people's determination to obtain their legitimate rights and regain their seized land. The aid group Relief International reported on January 10th that Al-Aqsa Hospital in Jabalia, the last barely functioning hospital in the north, came under direct attack by Israeli occupation forces. The hospital received immediate evacuation orders at the beginning of January, and Relief International said that since then, the hospital has been awaiting clearance for the safe evacuation of patients to Gaza City. However, it had not been granted. An Al Jazeera correspondent said on Wednesday that Israeli vehicles were beginning to bulldoze the western side of the Indonesian hospital, which was completely rendered out of service last month. The UN reports that its health partners, quote, are warning of severe fuel shortages that are putting essential services at risk. According to the partners, all hospitals that are still partially functioning have exhausted their fuel reserves. They are now relying on piecemeal deliveries of fuel each day to try and sustain the most critical services. We continue our reporting on Israel's abduction and subsequent disappearing of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia in the north of Gaza. The hospital was surrounded and destroyed by Israeli forces on December 27th after more than 80 days of relentless attacks because doctors refused to abandon their patients and staff. Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights announced on Wednesday that they had confirmed that Israel had transferred Abu Safiya to Ofer military prison on January 9th. Israeli authorities continue to bar Abu Safiya from meeting Al-Mizan's lawyer until January 22nd. The American Academy of Pediatrics, representing tens of thousands of pediatricians and pediatric specialists, demanded that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken work to immediately release Dr. Abu Safiya, who is also a pediatrician as well as the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital. The American Academy of Pediatrics had been under pressure by groups such as Doctors Against Genocide, who had demanded the institution take a stand to end the genocide in Gaza and free their fellow pediatrician and so many other Palestinian doctors from illegal Israeli detention. Israel killed at least 6 journalists in Gaza this past week, bringing the number of reporters and media workers killed since October 2023 to 208. On January 10th, Syed Sabri Nabhan, who worked as a photojournalist with the Al-Gad satellite channel, was killed by an Israeli sniper in Nuseirat refugee camp, according to the Gaza government media office. On January 13th, Mohammed Bashir al-Talmas, an editor at the Palestinian press agency Safa, died after sustaining injuries during an Israeli airstrike on the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood in Gaza City. Also on January 13th, Israel killed Ahlam al-Nafad, a journalist and photographer, while she was walking to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, according to Dropsite News. Al-Nafad, who is also a nurse, documented the relentless attacks on the Indonesian hospital. Two reporters, Aql Salah and Ahmed Abu al-Rous, were killed on Wednesday in separate airstrikes. Salah was killed in an air attack that targeted a group of people in the Shati refugee camp west of Gaza City, Al Jazeera reported. And Abu al-Rous was killed in Nuseirat along with 3 others in an Israeli airstrike that targeted the vehicle they were in. Abu al-Rous had uploaded a video of himself just hours before he was killed, expressing joy and cautious optimism at the prospect of a ceasefire. He said, quote, "All good people, we are now in the final moments. We, the people of Gaza, need your prayers," in his video. Also on Wednesday, journalist Ahmed Al-Shaya was killed in an Israeli airstrike targeting a food distribution point in Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of this one by Malak Hijazi, our contributor based in Gaza. Malak writes, quote, "For 15 long months, the people of Gaza have endured a brutal genocidal war. We've lost loved ones, homes, and any sense of normalcy. But as talks of a potential ceasefire grow, hope flickers that it might take effect before U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration next week. Our eyes remain glued to our phones, scrolling through news, both real and fake, waiting for the announcement. We long to hear the word ceasefire spoken aloud, a fragile sense of relief after all the death we have witnessed. Reports of progress in negotiations spark fleeting celebrations, with cheers rising from makeshift tents, schoolyards, and partially destroyed houses, where 1.9 million people, 90% of Gaza's population, have been forced to find shelter. Yet, as we reflect more deeply on the situation, our faint happiness fades into disillusionment. While a ceasefire may silence the bombs, it raises a far heavier question. What comes next? For those of us who remain barely alive, the future feels like a question mark. I live in constant fear, haunted by the uncertainty of whether Gaza will ever heal. And honestly, I don't ask for much. I long for Gaza as it was before the genocide, with all its daily flaws and struggles. But even that feels like too much to ask. How do you rebuild a home when the very force accused of destroying it holds the keys to its recovery? Will Israel ever allow us to rebuild what it has destroyed, or let us claim our liberty? I can't stop thinking about a report the United Nations released back in 2012 titled Gaza in 2020, A Livable Place. It outlined a bleak future for Gaza, forecasting immense challenges as the population grew from 1.6 million to an anticipated 2.1 million by 2020. The report warned of critical issues. Electricity supply would need to double. The coastal aquifer, our primary source of fresh water, was at risk of irreversible collapse, and tens of thousands of housing units were urgently required. Looking back on that report now, it feels hauntingly prescient. Yet even its stark warnings could not have imagined the horrors we now face. The report was written long before the 2023 genocidal war that has devastated Gaza beyond recognition. It assumed a Gaza that, while strained, would still exist, still function. It did not anticipate a reality where survival itself would be in question. Malak ends her piece with this call. This war will not end with the last airstrike. Its effects will linger in the rubble, in the struggle to rebuild, and in the constant fear that the ceasefire will not last. The people of Gaza need more than words of solidarity. We need meaningful global action to support reconstruction and ensure accountability. Those are excerpts from This Will Not End with the Last Airstrike by Malak Hijazi on electronicintifada.net. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to share images of people expressing defiance and resilience in the face of Israel's campaign of destruction. In the past 24 hours, as the news of the possible ceasefire spread, Palestinians poured into the streets in celebration across Gaza. Two of the journalists we rely on for news in the north, Anas Al-Sharif and Hossam Shabat, were in the streets reporting live as the ceasefire deal was announced on Wednesday evening. Anas Al-Sharif said, quote, I can take this helmet off, which has exhausted me throughout this entire period, and this flak jacket as well, which has been part of my body during this period. And now we announce from here, within the Gaza Strip and from within Gaza City, the announcement of a ceasefire for these citizens and for all residents of Gaza.
هذه الخوذة ميادة التي أرهقتني طوال هذه الفترة، وأيضا هذا الدرع الذي كان جزء من جسدي خلال هذه المدة وخلال هذه الفترة الطويلة، والذي كان على مدار الوقت يرافقني. والآن نعلن هنا من داخل قطاع غزة ومن داخل مدينة غزة هذا الإعلان ووقف إطلاق النار للمواطنين ولكل سكان غزة الذين
While being carried on the shoulders of his community, Hassam Shabat said that it was a joyful atmosphere and that his eyes welled up with tears. Shabat wrote early this morning on Twitter or X that, quote, "I can hardly believe it. After 16 long months, I'm on the verge of reuniting with my family. The news of the ceasefire brings such a wave of relief that we desperately need. I've made a promise to myself to continue reporting as long as the genocide continues. But soon I can finally rest, and most importantly, I'll soon be able to hug my mom." In central Gaza, a woman spoke to journalist Fadi Tabet, explaining that the people will rebuild Gaza. She says, quote, "We will remove the rubble, we will rebuild, and Gaza will return to being even more beautiful. This little girl, the daughter of a martyr, her sister, this person, that person, there's an old man, a young man, all of us will rebuild it, and it will go back to being better than before. Gaza is inside of us. We are the ones who remained steadfast and endured. None of them achieved anything, not one leader or any country. The real achievement is here. Those who achieved, this is me, her, and them, and we are proud that we achieved this and we endured. May God grant you health."
وحنبني وحنعمر وحترجع غزة أحلى من قبل. في طفلة بنت شهيد، في أختها، في ختيار، في شاب، كلنا حنعمرها وحترجع أحلى من قبل. غزة فينا، إحنا اللي صمدنا وإحنا اللي صبرنا. ولا إنجازات لأي حدا ولا لأي قيادة ولا لأي كبير ولا أي دولة. الإنجاز هنا، هذا الإنجاز وأنا وهي ونفتخر إنه إحنا اللي أنجزنا، إنه صبرنا. يعطيك العافية.
And finally, a group of children erupted with joy at hearing the news of a looming ceasefire. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you. And it's just, there's so much emotion, and we're going to talk about so much of what's going on. But I think the hardest things now is that I do think this ceasefire will take effect, even though Netanyahu is pulling all sorts of last-minute tricks. I do think it will take effect. I believe that. But between now and Sunday, Israel is going to commit so many more atrocities, and that's utterly unbearable. Yeah. And I think the thing we need to stress all the way through is that this ceasefire is a beginning, not an end. And that's something that 𝐄𝐥𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 stresses in her piece. And all of us here at the Electronic Intifada and everyone who's watching has been here for 468 days. And we need to have exactly the same commitment going forward to be here with and for the people of Gaza, no matter what comes next.
Exactly. And you know, I mean, this, you know, we're all cautiously optimistic about the ceasefire. We know that there have been some kind of last-minute shenanigans, but yeah, I mean, we know from all of the past years where Israel has been resoundingly defeated by Palestinian resistance or by Lebanese resistance, that they take the last 72, 48 hours before the ceasefire takes hold to carry out as many massacres as they can. And so we are all very, we anticipate, we want Sunday to come as soon as it can. And we also still are very fearful for our friends and our colleagues in Gaza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that now with someone who is from Gaza. And we will have a lot ahead, as you mentioned, Shir Hever. And of course, Jon is going to tell us what's happening on the ground in Gaza with the resistance and much more. But we're happy to be joined now by Ahmed Alnaouq, co-founder and director of We Are Not Numbers. He hosts a podcast with Palestine Deep Dive, and he is advocacy director for the Euromed Human Rights Monitor. He has a master's degree in international journalism from Leeds University, and Ahmed's writings have been widely published. Many viewers will remember that we last spoke to Ahmed on October 30th, soon after the first anniversary of Israel's massacre of 21 members of his family. And I want to name them, as we did on that day. Israel's bombing of Ahmed's family home killed his father, Nasri Alnaouq, who was 75, his sister Wala and her children Raghd, Islam, and Sarah, and Abdullah, who was just 6 years old, Ahmed's brother Muhammad, with his children Bakr and Basima, his sister Ala and her children Islam, Dima, Tala, and Noor, and Nesma, and who was the youngest at just 2, his sister Aya and her children Malak Bashir, Muhammad Bashir, and Tamim Bashir. The Israeli attack also killed Ahmed's brother Mahmoud Alnaouq, who was 25 years old, and a cousin Ali Al-Qurinwi, who was 35. They are among the tens of thousands of Palestinians murdered in this genocide, which, as we speak, has not yet ended. But for the first time in more than 15 months, the ceasefire, set to take effect on Sunday, offers an end in sight to the massacres and bloodshed. Ahmed, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ali, for having me.
Ahmed, these days and hours must be filled with a lot of emotions. What is your reaction to the news of the ceasefire agreement?
A lot of emotions, Ali. Yesterday I was pinched to the TV watching the news day and night, waiting for this moment where they announce that they have finally agreed to a ceasefire. And I couldn't believe it, to be honest. I thought for the past 15 months, I thought that this moment will not come. I thought that Israel is determined, and I know Israel was determined to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from Gaza, to destroy Gaza, to kill and inflict so much damage and suffering on the Palestinian people, and take Gaza, build settlements. I thought this is going to happen. But then when suddenly I heard that a ceasefire deal has achieved, and Israel will withdraw from Gaza. And more than that, Palestinian prisoners will be released, and Israel did not defeat the Palestinian people, and Israel did not defeat the resistance, and the Palestinians are still in their homes, and they are still in the Gaza Strip. I was in a state of disbelief, and I thought in my heart, Gaza has won. We, the Palestinians, have won. And Israel is defeated miserably. And Ali, I'm not someone who's far removed from reality. Some people will say, oh my God, this is over-enthusiastic Palestinian who lives in London, far away from Gaza. But no, I lived in Gaza all my life. I've endured the siege in Gaza. I've endured many wars in Gaza, and I've lost everyone I care about in Gaza. As you have said, I lost the vast majority of my family members. I've lost my home. the home that I built with my hands and the home that I invested all my savings in. I've lost everything in Gaza, and I have been under pain here in the UK for the past 15 months under smear campaigns and all of that. So I'm not far from reality. I know exactly what happened in Gaza. I know there was the worst live stream genocide in history was carried out against the people in Gaza. I know that 90% of the people in Gaza are displaced right now in Gaza. I know that, and I have watched a lot of footage and videos coming from Gaza of people, of civilians being decapitated, of children shredded apart, of houses destroyed, of entire neighborhoods destroyed, of hospitals, of schools, of universities that I went to. I've seen them being destroyed. And I know all of that. I know it's very painful. I know the suffering is immense. But I know the Palestinian people are under a huge horror and terrorism. They're under terrorism. Israel is a terrorist state that is practicing their terrorism against the Palestinian people. But despite all these odds, despite all of what's happened, Gaza have emerged victorious. Do you know why? Because Gaza was not defeated. And this is the thing about us Palestinians, not only about us Palestinians, about all of those people who are living under occupation, We can never be defeated unless we feel that we are defeated, and the Palestinian people will never be defeated. We will never have our spirits defeated and broken. We, the Palestinian people in Gaza, after 15 months of genocide, of the worst genocide, live stream genocide in history, we emerge victorious after 15 months of this horror. This is how I feel. I feel elevated. And I understand. Maybe some people would say that we shouldn't be celebrating because there are a lot of families who were slaughtered, a lot of people who were killed in Gaza. The Gazans are still under genocide until this moment. But I do not celebrate the death of the Palestinians. I celebrate the end of the death for other Palestinians.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, the reality is that Israel, and it's not just Israel, it's the United States and the entire West, the most powerful empire in history, threw everything they had without mercy, without red lines, without limits, without any humanity at a tiny besieged piece of territory, and they couldn't conquer it. And they couldn't break the spirit of the people. We saw only a small taste of that in the videos we saw in the news of people saying that they're determined to rebuild and they're determined to stay. And it's not that we want to romanticize people, but we want to respect what they're saying and what they went through. And they didn't go through it to say at the end of it that we were defeated, when it was Israel that, Netanyahu, before the Congress, the US Congress in June, said we won't accept less than total victory. And total victory meant Hamas is disarmed and destroyed, and the hostages or captives are released unconditionally, and we control Gaza. And they achieved none of that. So how can that be considered anything other than a defeat for Israel?
Israel did not achieve any of its objectives, except for one objective, which is inflict as much suffering as possible on the people in Gaza. And I believe Israel achieved this objective. They have inflicted a lot of suffering on the Palestinian people. But in the process of achieving this objective, they have made of themselves a rogue state, a pariah state. Now all the world knows about what happened in Gaza. Thanks to the journalists in Gaza, everyone knows exactly what happened to Gaza. And Ali, what we have seen in Gaza, what the world has seen in Gaza, the footage, the screams, the testimony, the stories that came from Gaza, these things that the world will never forget. What the world has seen, they will never be able to unsee that. They will never unhear what they have heard during this genocide. And it came at an opposite effect for the Israelis. The Israelis have not won. They did not win, and they will not win. And by the way, Ali, it's not only the US that fought the Palestinians in Gaza, it's the whole world. We stood against the whole world, against the American empire, the British empire, the Western, the Eastern. Everyone was collaborating against Gaza. Everyone was participating in this genocide against Gaza. The banks, the mainstream media played a role in uncovering the truth about Gaza. We have fought against all of that. and then the Palestinian people are not defeated. And because we are not defeated, we have won.
Ahmed, the focus right now is understandably on the immediate relief for people in Gaza. That a ceasefire and the promised surge of humanitarian deliveries will bring. Are you already thinking about the future of Gaza and what that will look like?
Well, I will not romanticize the future about Gaza. I know that Gaza will not be a paradise just after the genocide ends. I know that the people in Gaza will still continue to struggle and suffer for many years to come. It will not be easy to rebuild Gaza. It will not be easy to feed the people in Gaza right now. It will be a very daunting and very difficult task. But what I care about now the most is the end of the bloodshed of the Palestinian people. And then the Palestinians can survive. We will survive. We need right now to end the genocide, and hopefully on Sunday, the genocide will end. And then, according to the ceasefire deal, Israel will allow 600 trucks per day to enter Gaza. And I think that will be sufficient. It will not be enough to rebuild Gaza, but I think it will be sufficient to aid the starving people, the population in the Gaza Strip. And I believe that will starting from Sunday. So I'm hopeful that finally the starvation of the Palestinian people will end. Finally, people will have at least tents or caravans to stay in until there is a reconstruction of Gaza. But until there is a reconstruction of Gaza, and I know that this will take many, many years, the attention for Gaza should not dwindle. The attention and the media attention for the people in Gaza should only grow stronger, because the people in Gaza right now, they still need the people. They still need you. All of the activists, all of the media, all of the attention has to stay on Gaza right now until the situation is a little better. And by the way, I have to say that this is not the end of the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians, between Israel and the Palestinian people. We are still at the beginning. There will never be everlasting peace until there is a free Palestine, until the apartheid regime is dismantled, until the occupation is lifted. So for that, I think the support for the Palestinian people should not stop right now. It should intensify so that we do not see other genocides in the future.
Ahmed, you live in the UK, and you may or may not want to comment on specific statements this or that politician has said, but there's been a lot of comment about the statement from Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, today, which on the ceasefire, which mentioned the suffering and the massacres and the atrocities against Israelis, but barely acknowledged the Palestinian people and what they've been through, and didn't name who did it to them. What's your sense of being in the UK in terms of the gulf between what we hear from governments and what we hear from ordinary people, and what have you seen change over the past 15 months? You talked about, yes, the world has watched these horrors and it will never be the same, but just talk about what you've experienced in the UK over the last 15 months.
It's not surprising that Keir Starmer made this statement. At the beginning of the genocide, Keir Starmer said that they stand with Israel, that the UK stands with Israel. They have continued their support to Israel, despite the huge discrepancy between the British people and the British elite and the British politicians. I have been participating in these protests every Saturday, where hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people participate in these protests, calling for an end of the participation, not complicity, the participation of the British government in the genocide in Gaza. Unfortunately, the British government does not care about its people, and it's really disappointing. I love the British people. I care a lot about the British people, and I care a lot about the voices of the British people. But unfortunately, their own leaders don't care about them. Their own leaders have been watching them protest for months, for 15 months. This protest never ended, and the government did not change its policy towards Israel, despite the UN resolution, despite the ICC and the ICJ resolution, which all say that Israel is committing war crimes against the Palestinian people and genocide. And still Keir Starmer and David Lammy unfortunately continued their participation in the genocide against the Palestinian people. So that statement is not surprising. He made it clear he stands with Israel. And for him, the only people who matter are the Israeli people, the hostages. The same as Donald Trump, which said, when he described the ceasefire deal, he said the hostages deal. He cares only about the Israeli hostages. They don't care about the Palestinian hostages. And this is what Vijay Prashad says, the division of humanity. It's really annoying that for these leaders, the only people who deserve life are the Israelis, and the Palestinians, no matter how much they suffer, they don't care about them, as we are numbers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Ahmed, a ceasefire is not the end of the suffering, as you say, and the struggle, the liberation struggle of people in Gaza and across Palestine by any means. As you mentioned, everyone in Gaza faces difficult days ahead, to say the least. And their struggle is part of the much larger struggle for the liberation of Palestine. What is your message today to people who are watching? How, you mentioned that people need to keep supporting Palestinians. How can people keep supporting the people of Gaza and the broader Palestinian struggle for liberation in this next phase?
Well, Gaza stands at the forefront of this war against dehumanization, against capitalism, against colonization, against occupation, against racism, because Zionism is a racist endeavor. And the Palestinians in Gaza stand at the forefront of all of this war. And this war does not relate only to the Palestinians, it relates to every single one of us. As I said now, the British government does not care about the Palestinians. They do not care about their own people, the British people. So what we are trying to do in the Gaza Strip is to open the eyes of the entire universe, the entire world, that this is not just a war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. This is a war between good and bad, between evil and goodness. And they should continue to support the Palestinian people, not only for the Palestinian people, but for themselves, because the genocide has been facilitated by the British, by the Americans, by the Western governments, by Europe and the NATO. And everyone who lives here in this region should have a say in what their government is doing in their name. If they fail Gaza, then they fail themselves. If they stop talking about Gaza, then they're failing themselves. And you need Gaza more than Gaza needs you.
Ahmed, I know that you will continue doing your work to raise awareness and to struggle for justice and accountability for this genocide and to support the people in Gaza and across Palestine. And one of the ways you're doing that is through your work with We Are Not Numbers, the project that you co-founded along with our very dear Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who on this day especially we miss, along with so many others who should be here with us. And I just want to remind people of that. We can show the We Are Not Numbers website, which has a similar mission to the Electronic Intifada of raising and elevating the voices of people in Gaza. And you, through We Are Not Numbers, have played an extraordinary role in mentoring, publishing and supporting young writers in Gaza, many of whom write for the Electronic Intifada as well. And so I just want to remind people that this is another important project that they can get involved in, that they can share the stories, that it's a way to continue to stay connected with people in Gaza, and to thank you for all the work you do, Ahmed. And we hope and pray that Sunday comes quickly and that it brings the relief to all the people in Gaza, and that we'll have much better days ahead.
Thank you very much, Ali. And I was very happy and very pleased to see that one of our writers, Malak Hijazi, wrote this piece that you mentioned today. So our writers are now one of the most who write stories from Gaza to Electronic Intifada and to other Palestinian and Palestinian websites. And one last thing, Ali, we recently managed to get a deal with Penguin to publish our first book our first book for We Are Not Numbered, which is going to be an anthology of the best stories that we have published during the past 10 years since the inception of We Are Not Numbered until the genocide. So please, I would recommend that people pre-order this book, because we need to make it a bestseller book, because if it's a bestseller, then more people will know about it. So please get yourself a copy.
Ahmed, what's the title of the book?
It's called We Are Not Numbers, The Voices
And when
of Youth.
it's called We Are Not Numbers from Penguin. And when does it come out?
It will come out on the 25th of April.
Wow.
Okay. So
Mabruk.
Mabruk, we would love to have you back to talk about it when it comes back. And perhaps you can be joined then by some of the writers who contributed to it. It would be wonderful if we could all have that discussion together.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
so much,
Ahmed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Incredible. Thank you. And I also want to plug Ahmed's fantastic podcast, Palestine Deep Dive. You can find that on Instagram and on YouTube, of course. Really incredible long form discussions. Yeah, I love that show, and I love Ahmed's work, and we're just so lucky.
Yeah.
So lucky.
Well, I can't
yeah.
wait to add the book to the shelf behind
Yeah.
me with other
Same.
incredible books of writing from people in Gaza and people from Gaza that continue to be an incredible resource to educate and motivate people.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Thank you, Ahmed. Well, you are listening and watching the Electronic Intifada live stream today. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. We know very well that Israel could not conduct this genocide by itself. It has only been able to do so due to a massive and continuous airlift of weapons, especially bombs, from the United States. And of course, all the warplanes Israel uses to bomb Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen are provided by the United States as well. While the U.S. is Israel's main arms supplier, Germany and other states play a major role as well. We're pleased to welcome back Shir Hever to the live stream. Shir is the military embargo coordinator for the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions National Committee, the BNC. Shir, who lives in Germany, is the author of The Privatization of Israeli Security and the Political Economy of Israel's Occupation. Shir, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thanks for having me on such a dramatic day.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. Well, we're going to get into the arms embargo and kind of, your analysis of Israel's political economy in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the latest developments with the ceasefire deal and what's happening with Israel. As we've been reporting at the Electronic Intifada, there are two key factors that led to this happening now. The first is the continued strength of the resistance on the ground in Gaza, inflicting daily losses on the Israeli army, which after 15 months has not managed to impose its control on any part of Gaza, despite perpetrating genocide. And the second is Donald Trump's apparent willingness, surprising to many, to apply direct pressure on Israel that the Biden administration has refused to do. But what are the factors within Israeli society that may have contributed to Netanyahu finally accepting a deal that was on the table that he has refused for more than a year?
Yeah, I think we can talk about two main factors within Israeli society. The first one is the religious one, because Netanyahu has always tried to frame the colonialism of the colonial occupation, apartheid, and also the genocide as a religious war, as if this is between Judaism and Islam in some way, which is, of course, a false narrative completely, but it helps his popularity within Israel. And in order to do so, he has tried to create a coalition within Israel of very different factions. The way that apartheid works, it creates internal divisions, because it creates a complex hierarchy, and different groups within Israel, they expect to have privileges, not only over Palestinians, but also over certain Jewish groups within Israeli society. So there is now a deep crisis within Israeli society. And the only reason that the Netanyahu is able to stay in power is through a continued crisis. He needs the genocide to continue. He also needs the suffering to continue, not just on the Palestinian side, but on some level on the Israeli side as well. You've spoken about the resistance. You've spoken, the fallen Israeli soldiers, the injuries, and so on, because that makes it possible for him to say, as long as this is happening, I need to stay in power. But the soldiers on the ground, they are not really part of the ultra-Orthodox, or not at all part of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish tradition, which by and large opposes militarism. It's mainly an anti-Zionist movement. And even though there are a lot of ultra-Orthodox people in Israel who are racist, who support the military, support Zionism indirectly and support the genocide, but they will take no part in it. And they say, well, we are praying for the soldiers to win and to destroy the Palestinians, but the soldiers don't accept that. The soldiers say, no, we want them to fight. So this creates a very deep political problem within Israel, which is insurmountable, actually. There is just no way in this apartheid system, which is built on so much hate between the different groups, that any kind of majority government can sustainably stay in power. This is why Israel had so many elections rapidly, one after the other, over such a long time, because every time a new government has some kind of fragile agreement, and it always falls when it reaches those contradictions. So this is a religious problem. And I think it's very interesting because the religious problems are very, they hinge on a very populist perception of what is religion. And you see that Netanyahu, for example, when he wants to go to Poland and attend the Auschwitz liberation ceremony, maybe something we should say something about it, because I mean, as a Jew, I find this horrible and proof that Poland really doesn't care about the commemoration of the Holocaust if they're inviting a genocidaire to commemorate another genocide. But Netanyahu, it's so important for him to go to this ceremony, despite the arrest warrant against him by the ICC, because he needs to show that he represents the Jewish people. That is such an important point. Now, when Donald Trump won the election and decided he's going to appoint a Middle East envoy even before being inaugurated, he appointed Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff called Netanyahu and said, I'm coming to Israel and I'm going to talk to you about the negotiations. So there's going to be a ceasefire deal before Trump is inaugurated. And Netanyahu said, oh, but that's not possible because it's Shabbat. And, again, bringing in the religious part into it. But this is maybe the difference between the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, because the populism can also recognize populism for what it is. And of course, Steve Witkoff understands that this is not about Netanyahu respecting Shabbat in any religious way. It's just another excuse. And he said, I'm not interested in your Shabbat, something that I doubt somebody in the Biden administration would dare say. So that's one thing that we see, the religious aspect. The second aspect really has to do with the military embargo. And I hope that's going to be the core of our conversation, really, because you mentioned that the same deal was offered already by the Biden administration almost a year ago. And Hamas did accept it, and Netanyahu didn't. And at that moment, there were talks that the Biden administration might delay certain weapons, might prevent certain weapons from reaching Israel. And then there was this famous speech by Netanyahu where he said, we're going to fight with our tooth and nail. We don't need those weapons. Again, clear populism, clear lies. Everybody knows that he's lying. But he had the audacity to say it because there was within the Israeli public security that there are enough weapons coming, one way or another. And Israelis still believed, well, if the US will delay some weapons, we'll get them elsewhere. We'll get them from Germany. We'll get them from Serbia. That's also something very important to mention, because Serbia has an agreement with Israel, two countries that have decided not to recognize each other's genocides and are trading weapons in violation of international law. So Netanyahu was able to make that bold statement. But I think now the public opinion in Israel has shifted. The military embargo is something that Israelis are completely aware of. They know that there is a military embargo. They know that the only country that is providing Israel with a steady supply of weapons is the United States. Yes, also Germany is supplying weapons, but is supplying certain kinds of weapons and not others, so it's not enough. And Trump really has the ability to completely disarm Israel within. I mean, Biden had it as well, but Biden had no intention of doing so. And now Netanyahu cannot say we'll fight with our tooth and nails again, because now the Israeli public understands that it's just not going to work. And so there is an understanding within Israel that the independence of the Israeli military, its ability to continue to fight, is a whole different story now. And this is a direct result of the military embargo.
We're definitely going to talk more about the military embargo, but before we get to that, I do want to ask you a little bit more, just to follow up on the discussion we had with you when you were last with us in June, and you told us about the impact that the war and genocide in Gaza have been having on Israeli society economically and socially. That was 7 months ago, and in the meantime, there was also the war with Lebanon, the Iranian missile strike on October 1st, and of course, the ongoing strikes from Ansarullah in Yemen. I want to show you a recent headline and get your reaction to it. And this is just from 2 weeks ago, from December 31st, where we have the Times of Israel that has this article, which states, quote, an unusually large number of Israelis left the country over the course of 2024, the Central Bureau of Statistics said, fueling a sharp slowdown in population growth amid a dragged-out war and domestic political turmoil. The article also says that Israel is including more than 200,000 foreign workers in its population figures for the first time. Is that an effort to hide Israel's population decline? What can we read from these figures? Are they like Israel's casualty figures, where they're massaged, and or are they telling a true story? What's going on? And more broadly as well.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of propaganda, a lot of massaging of the facts by the various Israeli institutions that are collecting the data. But in addition to this, there's also just a lack of capacity, which I think is very interesting, that the Israelis just don't know. I mean, a lot of people that I know, that I'm in touch with, that have decided to leave Israel are not, canceling all of their contracts, saying goodbye to all their friends, taking a one-way ticket and just leaving Israel behind. They don't know what the future will bring, especially people with families. So they sign a long-term lease on some apartment in Greece or in Portugal or in Cyprus, and they say, well, we'll send our kids to school in that country for 1 year, then we'll see what happens. Let's still pay some of our social taxes in Israel so we don't lose our benefits. So as long as you pay those taxes, you're not listed as having left the country. You're counted as only on vacation. So those numbers are not even showing. So this is happening. I don't know if we can talk about a decline in the population, because overall the number of people, the number of we have in an apartheid situation. It's a very complex situation. It's not just the citizens; it's also the residents. It's also people who are not recognized by the authorities and undocumented and so on. There are many different levels in East Jerusalem. Residents are officially supposed to be part of a territory that Israel has annexed, but nevertheless they don't have citizenship. But But I don't think that we are seeing a decline in the overall population. The important thing is, who are the people who are living? What are their characteristics? And the people who are leaving are first and foremost the people who have the opportunity to leave. Not necessarily that they have the political inclination, but rather just that they have the education, the money, the connections, a job offer overseas. Maybe they work in an international company and they can ask for a relocation or transfer within the company. Those people belong to the elite. Those people are the upper middle class, and they are the engine of Israel's economy. They are the ones who fuel the high-tech sector. Also, they are the ones who fuel the Israeli military strength, which relies not on foot soldiers with guns, but relies on intelligence and on high-tech weapons and complicated guidance system and surveillance, and all that stuff is developed by companies staffed by those upper middle class people who are leaving in large numbers. There was recently the PISA education results, which is an international testing system to test various competencies among school children. And Israel dropped dramatically in both mathematics and sciences because also the best teachers are leaving. And the families and as the education system is anyway in a free fall, really, the tech companies are saying, well, if this is the next generation of students in schools who are and in universities that will graduate and will want to work for us, we're going to need to find our workforce elsewhere. So that's part of the wave of divestment that we see. So I don't think it's just the question of what is the population trend, but it is a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy is always about what is the prospects for the future. Nobody makes an investment unless they think the investment will bring a profit in the future. And if you think the future is bleak, and most Israelis think the future is very bleak for the Israeli economy, then why make an investment? So if the Israeli own population, when they go to the bank and say, I want to make sure that my pension fund or my insurance funds or whatever, my personal investments are not invested in the Israeli economy. I have no faith in the Israeli economy. Please invest abroad. And so many people have done that the trust funds, which are operated within Israel for those kinds of investments, have shifted more than 50% of their investments abroad. And ironically, this created the image as if the Israeli economy is actually not affected so much by the war, because then they got dividends in foreign currency. They got a lot of dollars and euros from those investments they made abroad. They brought them to Israel and converted them to the Israeli currency, thereby sustaining in a very artificial and unsustainable way the Israeli currency. But as the cost of living in Israel skyrockets, these profits evaporate very quickly. So people who have no choice and they have to stay because they don't have another passport, they don't speak English or other languages, they don't have good education, or a lot of people who have sick parents that they need to take care of and so on. So they have to stay. They see their daily cost of living going up and up, out of control. The government is going to increase taxes, raise the prices even more through consumer taxes. A much more impressive headline that I've seen in the Israeli news this week was that the whole war was actually funded with debt. So the resources that Israel used in order to finance the war is all based on debt. And it's all about the hype that the Israeli economy has, which allows them to continue to sell bonds to investors who are stupid enough, sorry for saying so, to believe that if you buy a 10-year bond from Israel, you're ever going to see your money back. This is just a way to throw your money into the garbage, because there's no way Israel will ever repay this debt. And the Minister of Finance, who is also a fanatic settler, and a very religious person, he believes, that victory will still come because Trump was sent by God to save Israel. And Smotrich believes that people can continue to believe to buy into those lies that he's telling, that the deficit is not so bad, that the debt is still manageable. Members of his own ministry are leaving in frustration because they don't want to be caught when this whole house of cards falls down. They don't want to be part of it. The system is very much rotten from within. But once again, if you allow me, I want to connect it to the military embargo.
Please,
because
yes.
I think that one amazing thing that we see with the military embargo now is it's so hard to measure if the military embargo is really working or not, and how fast is it growing. But one very sure way of measuring it is the response within Israel. And according to Israeli law, the government has to propose a budget, and the Knesset, the parliament, has to authorize it by October for the next year. And if they don't do it by the end of October, the government falls and they go to elections. So they haven't actually passed the budget in the Knesset yet from last October. They just changed the law and gave themselves more time. We are now already in 2025. The budget is not really authorized yet. But in the draft of the budget, which is supposed to be discussed, they have said they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, which they don't have, in order to build a military industry in Israel to replace all of the weapons, ammunition, and materials that they cannot get because of the military embargo. And this is amazing. First of all, just a side note here, you cannot build materials, raw materials, no matter how many factories you make. If you don't have the raw materials, you're not going to get the materials. You have to import them. But of course, this is a message to the public. We're going to do everything locally. They're going to build a TNT plant, which will be an environmental disaster. And I really think that this is. I hope they never have time to do it, because this is Palestine and the Palestinian land, and Israel has no right to pollute the land that belongs to Palestinians. But the whole military industry that they're trying to develop, where they're saying, okay, if we cannot get the engines that we need for our vehicles and the components for the drones or for the F-35 planes, we don't have enough rifles, we don't have enough artillery, we're going to build everything domestically, no matter what it costs. But this shows how short a historical memory people have in Israel, because this whole war, this whole genocide, has been a rerun from the Israeli point of view, a rerun of the War of 73. Right, the War of 73 started as a surprise attack against Israel on October 6th. And then 50 years later and one day later, it was October 7. And once again, Israel was caught by surprise and underestimated their enemies and overestimated their own intelligence capabilities. And there was a big crisis. But the War of 73, there's something that in my research, I've investigated it a lot, because the War of 73 came just 6 years after the occupation of 67. Before 67, the biggest supplier of weapons to Israel was France. This was before the US major military financing to Israel. France was the biggest supplier. And Israel conquered all of Palestine and also parts of Egypt and Syria using French weapons, mostly. That's not very well-known fact. After the war, France said, if Israel is not going to withdraw from the territory that it conquered and occupies, then we will impose a military embargo. And Israel had no intention of withdrawing, of course, still doesn't. And France did impose a military embargo. And then the response in Israel was, well, who needs them anyway? We'll produce everything locally. The same thing that we're seeing now. And they did spend a lot of money, and they built this massive industry to build everything in Israel, the tanks, the airplanes, the ships, the artillery. And then the War of 73 happened and started, and the Syrian and Egyptian armies in that war were armed with Soviet weapons, which were far superior to the Israeli domestically made weapons. The Israelis, the Uzi submachine gun that Israel is so proud of, had a range of 100 meters. The Soviet Kalashnikov had 400 meters range. So infantry battles were completely one-sided. And the Israelis were about to be wiped out. I mean, the Israeli forces were about to be wiped out until the US came and gave them American weapons, and that changed the course of the war. Now it seems that Israel has forgotten this completely, because they're doing the same mistake they did in 1967. Faced with the military embargo, their response, we don't need the world, we'll do everything on our own, we'll build everything. And not only this, they're planning to build all these weapons when their best engineers, their best technological experts, their best professors have left the country. So this is a connection, I think, that we see between the military embargo and the expanding military embargo that we see, and the collapse of the Israeli economy.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Your work with the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee, or the BNC, on the military embargo is, there's so much that's coming out about this, a lot, based on your work. Last week, the BNC published this article titled "The Military Embargo is Here." It says that, quote, "Global South governments are taking important steps in implementing the military embargo." Tell us more about some of those actions and what is significant about this current military embargo that is, that is taking place.
So the military embargo is legally obligated. It's an obligation under international law anyway. So the fact that we don't see a comprehensive military embargo against Israel implemented from day one of the genocide is unfortunately a sign of a lot of hypocrisy, mainly in the West, not only, but mainly in the West. Over the last 15 months of genocide, the indicators of military embargo have been gathering, because in the end, governments are not going to make that decision on their own. But once the grassroots pressure emerges and grows, and there is media attention to this, and people are protesting effectively, then eventually the governments do implement the military embargo. So it took time. It took those, there's not a specific moment in which you can say, here, the military embargo has become so overwhelming. But I do think that when the Israeli society is seeing it, feeling it, they don't trust Netanyahu anymore to be able to fight this war without U.S. support, and they don't trust the government budget to import weapons from countries that are reluctant to export them or refuse to export them, and so they decide to try to make everything domestically. This is maybe an indication that we are reaching a critical mass. But this critical mass is made out of I've counted about 100 discrete events around the world, and mentioned, and the article that the BNC published mentions the most impressive ones, not all 100, but many of them, and under different categories. So you mentioned the Global South, which I think is very much worth mentioning, because the Global South, one thing we can say is that people who live in the Global South know something about colonialism and decolonialism. Unfortunately, many of the governments in the Global South are not necessarily progressive and pro-Palestinian governments at all. So their response to October 7 was not to say, okay, we have a legal obligation to implement a military embargo against Israel, but rather this would be a bad idea to buy the tools of surveillance and oppression that Israel has been testing on Palestinians for decades, and in order to use them against their own population, when we see that these tools are not working, and when we see that these companies, that the Israeli economy and the Israeli society is marching towards oblivion. So a lot of Israel's exports just plummeted. Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company, reported that their entire sales to the Global South have halved after October 7th, halved. But they are selling to the global north because those countries prefer not to remember what colonialism is about and decolonialism is about. So those countries with a shorter memory for political reasons were slower to respond. But eventually, we do see that as well. We see that through unions who made statements. And this is very important because the law is on their side. The unions, when they say, we cannot transit these weapons to Israel because we will be committing a serious crime. And as employees of a company, we shouldn't be ordered to commit a crime. And we could be actually prosecuted if we do. So they passed motions to in many different countries. And it is accelerating. Just this week, we've seen the Swedish port workers vote to impose a two-way military embargo, not to export, not to import. But even though it's very important, of course, to see that coming from countries like Sweden, it's even more important to see this coming from the transiting countries. Because, the biggest supplier of the weapons is the United States. The United States is not delivering its weapons to Israel through Sweden, but it is delivering them through Ireland and Belgium and Netherlands and Portugal and Spain and Italy, France, Germany, Slovenia even, Greece and Cyprus. In Greece, for example, the unions have had information that a container of ammunition is on a ship headed to Israel. So they took the container to the fish market and they guarded it there so that nobody can take it from them. And the ship had to leave without it. And they effectively stopped a whole shipment, these giant containers with tons of ammunition. Just imagine how many lives were saved by stopping one container of bullets. So this is very inspiring work, and because it's so inspiring, because it's important for people to understand that this is a trend, that it's growing in momentum, that the military embargo is not the exception, it is the norm. It's actually the United States which is the exception, and the United States is finding it more and more difficult to send their weapons through the tightening military embargo of countries that refuse to transit these weapons. Then it's a message that I hope will help inspire groups all over the world to take on military embargo campaigns from the grassroots, through academia, unions, civil society, and eventually through governments.
And it can be done. It's being done. Yeah.
It is being done. And of course, a few weeks ago or a month or two ago, we had some of the activists, two of the activists from the Palestinian youth movement who've done incredible research into this and whose research helped prompt Spain to stop transshipments of weapons from the United States to Israel, which is really important. Shir, you've talked about the global south, but of course, as we know, and as you've said, most of the weapons come from the United States. And yes, a lot of us don't think about the importance of the transiting countries taking action as a serious contribution to an arms embargo. In the paper published by the BNC, it talks about cracks in the genocide enabling countries, in other words, the Western countries, which are Israel's main allies. And until they really decide to impose arms embargoes on a large scale, Israel will still be able to get its weapons. Do you agree with that? And what are the cracks and how big are they, I suppose?
Well, the supply chain is a fragile thing because the United States is willing to give those weapons for free, but no other country is. So once Israel runs out of money, then also the supply chain collapses. Spain in many ways is leading the conversation within Europe, even though the Spanish government has so far refrained from adopting a comprehensive statement that they will impose a three-way military embargo. But at least on the issue of selling and on the issue of transiting, the Spanish government recognizes its obligation. And I've met with members of the Spanish parliament and the Spanish minister to talk with them about this a year ago. It took some time for them to take action. And they have actually stopped ships carrying weapons to Israel already in the summer. But more recently, you mentioned the Maersk and the campaign, because it took another effort to explain to the Spanish government that petrol, which includes also petrol products like jet fuel, is a dual-use item. So they refused to acknowledge that. But of course, you need jet fuel for the planes that bomb Gaza. And now I think the Spanish government is starting to understand this and are also willing to stop the shipping companies, the very large shipping companies like Maersk, from transiting dual-use items to Israel. So this is a very important development, but it starts with the smaller companies, right? So when the country, when Elbit Systems are trying to get components for their bombs, for their weapons, they usually go to the smaller companies and try to secretly bring those components to Israel without. I've seen one of the contracts where they actually wrote into the contract that the shipping company is not allowed to put anything online about the contract for delivering materials for Elbit Systems. They are completely aware that this is illegal. Which is of course easier to get countries like Spain, but also Portugal and Malta, who also played a role here, to say, well, this is a ship that is clearly doing something underhanded. The law is very clear on this issue. Once we get that stage, and we did reach that stage, the next stage is to go after the giant corporations like Maersk. So, and that's where you also start to see the cracks in the global north, in those genocide enabling countries. In the previous interview, you spoke about the UK. I think a seminal moment for the UK was when civil servants wrote this letter where they said, by processing weapon export permits, we are concerned that we are committing a crime. And this is just our job. We are just civil servants. We're not supposed to commit crimes as part of our job. So the government needs to give us assurances that we don't carry liability if we do these things. So again, you don't really see the ethical argument here. It's not so much the moral outcry. These weapons are killing innocent civilians, and this is a crime against humanity, and we don't want any part of it. It's more about we don't want to get into trouble. Unfortunately, with those genocide enabling countries, this is the argument that works more.
Shir, finally, it seems like such a, it's a very specific form of activism that people are like, these global shipping companies, these global markets. How can one person, make a difference here? But as you and the BNC point out, that there are ways that people can get involved with this military embargo campaign. What are the steps that people can take? How do they plug in, whether they're here in the States or in Canada or across Europe? What are what notes do you have for people?
Sorry, there is no way for individuals to make a difference like this. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. But collectively, we can do a lot. Mm-hmm. When people organize, then the real question should be, organize around what kind of social impact that you can have. If you are a member of a church or a mosque or a synagogue, then this is a place that can organize a campaign. I think for the religious organizations, that the moral argument is really the best way to go. But for lawsuits that play a very important role in Western countries, because we need to act on the legal level. In the Western countries, the lawsuits require public awareness, public support. And usually the teams of lawyers will tell the activists, we need you to give information in a certain way, maybe hold vigil in front of the courthouse on a certain day. And the idea is to do it in a way that is coordinated with the team of lawyers. For others, it's not the legal process or the religious organizations, but rather the unions. If you are not necessarily a member of a union which is making weapons, I mean, those usually are the last to take action, fortunately, or the unions who are transiting and transporting the weapons. But even if you're a member of another kind of union, but you have connections through other union networks, like a teachers union would also have connections to university unions, which can take action on stopping military cooperation with Israeli universities on weapon developments. And then you have the academic networks, academic social circles are also very effective. Because the university research, joint research on weapon development is usually something that accompanies those arms deals. Another very important part of it, because the weapon agreements are reciprocal, there's usually a deal that says Israel needs, explosives, bombs, components for drones and planes, but is willing to sell surveillance equipment, targeting equipment, and so on. These kinds of technologies threaten civil liberties, threaten human rights in the importing countries. So civil society organizations that care about privacy, about equality, about the client privilege of clients of lawyers, who don't want, some private company eavesdropping on their conversation with their lawyers, or medical privacy. These organizations have a very strong reason to support blocking those import deals, and thereby also prevent the other side of this reciprocal agreement. So the point is, first of all, be part of a bigger group, join an existing organization. If there is no existing organization, found one. And the BNC is always very happy and ready to invite new groups to the networks that we're establishing. We have networks for different regions in the world, and for different kinds of campaigns where the organizations that are interested in military embargo can take action, and in a collective way. So we already had, for example, a global day of action against spyware, Israeli spyware, which is absolutely one of the ways that Israel is exporting the technology that is destroying, threatening civil liberties and privacy all over the world. Now the same spyware technology is used in Gaza to generate targets to kill people by hacking the phones of people in Gaza. So this network that is joined by a lot of organizations that are not necessarily interested in Palestine are now also part of the Palestinian solidarity movement. So if you're watching this and you want to do something for the military embargo, then your first question should be, who am I? What part of social circles am I active? Unions, churches, academia, or anything else? Which organizations are active already? and if there isn't one, then start one.
And yeah, exactly. And if you're not active, get active, because there will be a way. And I just wanted to highlight this statement from the BNC, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions National Committee, the day after ceasefire: escalate pressure to cease the genocide and help us dismantle apartheid. And this page, if we scroll down, I don't know if we can scroll through it here, but if you go to bdsmovement.net, you'll find this. And it's if you go down, it has lots of ideas of how to be active and how to join the boycott movement more broadly. And of course, that includes the military embargo, but it also includes academic and cultural boycott, consumer boycott. And recently, there have been big successes for the boycott movement more broadly. And Nora, I know this is something you cover a lot, but one that is relevant in the Middle East or in the Arab world is that Carrefour, the huge French multinational supermarket or hypermarket chain, is being driven out of country after country. They've already been driven out of Jordan. They've been driven out of Oman. And I think they will be driven out of other countries soon. And we reported on this at the time where, workers at the Carrefour stores in Jordan were saying the stores have been empty in over the last year. And now that Carrefour has pulled out and divested, and they're under a new brand which is not linked to Carrefour, the customers are coming back in. That's what we see anecdotally from people going to those stores and telling us. So, this is happening all over the world. Big companies like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and
Starbucks,
various Starbucks, even though Starbucks is not actually present in Israel, but the CEO has political leanings towards Israel that is sort of, I suppose, the impetus for that. But these are also big companies. I mean, Starbucks, McDonald's, Coca-Cola represent American empire and American might, and so this is a way for populations in the Arab world and other parts of the world, in Malaysia, Indonesia, where McDonald's has lost a huge amount of business, for them to make the United States and its corporate and capitalist class pay a price for supporting this genocide. So these are ways that people can and should get involved to escalate the pressure, to keep up the solidarity. And of course, the military embargo is so central to that as well, often overlooked, but crucially important. And so we're very grateful for the work you do on that, Shir.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's this report by the BNC is also highlighting the fact that the genocide doesn't immediately stop with a ceasefire. Right. People are still at risk, and still it's also about access to food and medicine and heating and all that. But we know that up to the implementation of the ceasefire, Israel is trying to kill as many people as they can. Once the ceasefire is implemented, we can expect, if we see what happened in the north in Lebanon, that Israel violated the ceasefire about 100 times within the first week. And even later, the Smotrich has already said the first stage of the agreement is acceptable. But after that, the intention is that Israel will violate the agreement and start the military embargo is what makes this sustainable and what will bring the genocide itself to an end. So we have to make sure that Israel doesn't have any weapons by which to kill people. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, simple and crucial. Shir Hever, you are always a delight to speak to. We're always so grateful for your expert analysis and for giving such a broad but sharp overview analysis of things that ordinary people can do to put a wrench into this system of genocide and apartheid. And so thanks. I know our viewers and listeners are always asking to have you back on, so we'll have you back on very soon. Thank you so much for all of your work. And again, people can go to bdsmovement.net. That's the website for the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions National Committee. And there are ways you can plug in, or as Shir says, found your own organization to join the global network of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Shir Hever, thank you so much. And we'll have you on very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shir.
Oh, always, uplifting to hear from
Yeah, and
Shir.
I had so many more questions for Shir.
Yes,
but,
always.
It's always fascinating to get his insights into Israeli society, because he knows it well. He grew up there, but as he told us, I think when we spoke to him in June, he, renounced his connection to Israel and moved to Germany, which is where his family ancestry is from, and so he exercised his right of return.
That's right.
Let's put it that way.
That's right.
But he has incredible insight and knowledge, and it's hard to get that. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. Always so grateful for that. Well, we're always grateful for Jon and his resistance report. Jon, come on up. Hey.
Hey guys, another great show.
Yeah, packed.
Great to hear from Ahmed and Shir. Shir's always brings a lot, and I can't imagine Ahmed's feelings today and after this, and having to watch from afar is just devastating. He's done such important work.
Yeah, he has. Yeah. And as he said, like, there's so much, I think we're all feeling this mix of emotions about the ceasefire, hoping that it actually gets implemented, bracing for more genocidal ramped up attacks before it gets implemented. And that this is, that the next stage is a stage of liberation and an end to the occupation. And, so there is a long road ahead. And as Ali said, this is the ceasefire has only come about because of the tenacity of the resistance, because of, once again, indigenous forces using ingenious methods to defend themselves against, the most sadistic U.S. vassal military that's ever existed. And so give us a sense of what we're going to see in your report. And
more of that historic resistance right up until the last day. And it's that resistance and the resistance of the population, the resistance of the school teachers and the school children, the medical workers, the civil defense workers. But of course, the resistance itself. And Israel was unable to conquer a single area of any size in the Gaza Strip, 468 days.
Yeah.
And people would not believe it unless they had seen it right here on the Electronic Intifada these past 15 months.
And it's been my honor to bring this reporting. So, and we'll keep doing it. There's lots more to cover. And I've been promising people that we'll reorganize and look at things in a broader scope. Should this ceasefire go into place, I feel like I'm sure we all feel it's difficult to trust the states that are involved in this, the duplicity and the lies that this entire war has been built on makes me very tentative about these days ahead. And even the fact, like you said, Nora, that Israel wants to escalate its crimes right up till the last minute, despite its failure. They just want to continue to inflict pain on the civilian population. So, scary few days ahead, but
Yeah.
definitely some hope in the air. And that's why it was so great to hear from Ahmed. And so we will
let's
take
go
it
for
away.
it.
All right. So this is the resistance report for day 468. And I want to say, as ever, everything you're going to see on this week's show has been published in the week since you last saw me. And for this week, it's the week ending January 16th. And that is 4 days before the scheduled pause in fighting that is supposed to happen on Sunday, should it happen. So just to give people that understanding, we'll take a look at the maps as ever to get started. Thank you to Tamara for guiding me through this the whole time. You can see the two key corridors there, the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor in red. The ceasefire agreement involves the withdrawal from both of those corridors. You can see on the Philadelphia corridor, actually, let's put the next map up tomorrow with the zoom. You can see here on the zoom, the Philadelphia corridor at the Rafah crossing. Critically, the Israelis are to give up the Rafah crossing and allow that to be used for wounded people to leave, for a surge of aid to come in. And ultimately, the prisoner exchange element will happen out through the Rafah crossing. So the Rafah crossing has been sealed since May the 7th, a devastating result from that, of sealing Gaza's only way to the outside world, and having Israeli control over that giving up control of that is a key part of the ceasefire agreement, and something that the Palestinians refused to concede through this entire genocide on those principles. We'll get into the ceasefire after the resistance report, and we'll get into it in detail, what we know about it. Nora covered a little bit in the opening. And we'll do more of that after. But I just want to say, in what we're looking at here, Khan Yunis and Rafah, there were operations this week in Rafah. The Qassam brigades carried out an ambush of an Israeli position in Al-Shabura camp in central Rafah. So even though the Israelis had drawn down from Rafah, there's operations still going on in Rafah. There's multiple operations in Rafah carried out by multiple resistance factions. There was an operation in Khan Yunis to capture drones. So even in the south, there's no videos from the south this week, but there were operations. And as we know, the videos only represent a small portion of the overall number of operations that take place. But there's significant ones this week that we'll take a look at, starting in the north of Gaza. If we go up there, we have, as Nora reported, 100 days passed on the siege of the north, the re-invasion of the north for the third time, focused on Jabalia camp and Beit Lahia in particular. And over the last week, Beit Hanun, more than 5,000 people were killed, more than 10,000 wounded, 2,600 detained in 100 days. Dismantling of all three of the main hospitals in the north happened. And Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson for the Qassam brigades, had a statement on the 100th day where he said, after more than 100 days of comprehensive destruction and genocide carried out by the enemy army in the northern Gaza Strip, our fighters are still inflicting heavy losses on it and dealing it harsh blows. We confirm that the losses in the ranks of the failed occupation army are much, much higher than what it announces, and the enemy will be defeated from the northern Gaza Strip, dragging its tails of shame without being able to break the back of the resistance. And the only achievement it has made is destruction, devastation, and massacres against innocent people. That is a consistent statement from Abu Ubaidah since day one of this war that we've watched. It's a war against civilians. The war on the Qassam brigades, on the military and militants in Gaza, is a failure. And that has been shown since the first day, and it will be shown right up to the last day, up till the ceasefire, should it come in place 4 days from now on Sunday. If we look at number one, you can see an operation here. The Qassam forces here, the commander is going to describe this operation against a command center that is the target. The red triangle shows that. That's a command center for the Israeli forces in Jabalia city, Jabalia al-Balad. And this comes after the fighter says, the commander says, after more than 10 days of field reconnaissance on the unit. And you can see the weaponry arrayed in front of him there. You can see the fighter here crossing the street with his weaponry. You can see him. This is a 𝐄𝐤𝐄𝐿 built thermobaric warhead. You can see all parts of it there, the rocket booster, the canister, and the primary charge at the front, which is to punch a hole in the wall. This is a uniquely 𝐶ASSAM Brigade's weapon. The second charge, the precursor charge that punches a hole in the wall, is only made by 𝐶ASSAM, and they do that by filling the Yasin 105 cartridge with thermobaric fuel. And you can see the fighter there launching that, and we see from a second camera from the side, direct hit again. We've seen this all throughout the war. They're targeting a specific, you can see the overpressure of a clearly successful operation. And the fighter, the spotter says, it's lit, which is a line that they've been using all throughout the war. Famously, remember the Islamic Jihad fighter said it when he was skipping after hitting a tank earlier on in the war. If we look at number 2, I brought the ISO of this because some people have asked throughout the war, why does the camera shake? If we watch this one just in ISO, you can see why the camera shakes. The backblast of the RPG is significant, and the fact that the fighters are able to sit beside these launches and get the camera work is very operationally intensive to do, and they are actually very successful at it, as you can see standing beside that. If your camera shakes a little bit, you could be forgiven. Some people in the comments, I know most people know the backblast on the RPG, but some people in the comments always say, why does the camera shake? That gives you a pretty good shot of it on day 468 of this war. So if we look at number 3, we're going to see a Yasin strike here against a tank. Again, you can see just the tank, the back of the tank. You can see it's going to give you a red triangle here in a second. So we're looking at the back of the Merkava here, sticking out of the rubble. We've got an elevated Yasin shot, and you can see immediately on this one, multiple colors of smoke, which indicates an immediate cook-off of the weaponry. So we're seeing a direct hit from an elevated firing position. You can see the smoke, the black smoke there, and then it's going to the spotter is going to show after that it's continuing to burn. You can see that it's a different color smoke. So we're seeing the cook-off of the targeting of the ammo storage in the back of the Merkava tank. So you can see it again there. The absolute destruction and rubble is what the fighters are using to their advantage. The Israelis think that they have destroyed this area, and fighters are still accessing it through their tunnel network and still hitting their tanks, causing casualties. The Israelis took as many casualties this week as any week in the war. They took more than 15 casualties that they admitted. Like Abu Ubaidah said, their casualties never matched the field reporting. And we know there was dozens injured. And again, the Israelis don't count their injured properly, don't announce they're injured properly. So that's another successful shot. If we look at number 4 here, I can show you this. This is again the from War Thunder, but it gives you from the video game, which I don't play, but they have good graphics here, and you can see the orange canisters at the back. The containers there are ammo storage. They're actually a lot larger on the actual tank, and you can see the space in there. That's where the infantry cabin is. So there's open space in this video game. They had shells in there, but that's not how the Israelis use it. The Israelis use it as benches for an infantry squad. So you can have 6 to 8 fighters in the cabin of the Merkava, and you can have 4. That's in addition to the 4 crew that you see, the loader, the driver that you can see up front there, and the commander. So the 𝐶ASSAM brigades are targeting the rear of these tanks, and you're going to see that again in number 5 here, where Saraya Al-Quds is going to use multiple EFPs. This is 𝐶ASSAM calls them the Shawaz. Saraya Al-Quds calls them the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 which is the piercer. So they're explosively formed penetrators, and the fighters mouse holing. Still, we've seen this all throughout the war, able to move between buildings without going out into the streets. And this is what has vexed the Israelis all through. And I'll read you some testimonies after these videos about the Israelis' reaction to these operations continuing, despite the fact that they've been laying siege to northern Gaza for more than 100 days. And this is the third major operation in the north. We'll remember back in the early days of the resistance report when I was telling you that the Israelis claimed operational control over Beit Hanun, and I said that wasn't true. It was clear from the fighters that it wasn't true, and now we are a year plus later, and you can see fighters still laying down. The graphics on the screens showing you the tank entering the ambush zone where the twin EFP, so one EFP is a devastating weapon, twins is particularly significant. And you can tell by where the targeting of this vehicle is that, again, they're targeting the rear of the vehicle rather than the front, which has loaded plates. This fighter says, "We have received news from field reconnaissance of a convoy of enemy forces advancing towards us, and we ask God for guidance and success in this operation." And here it comes. Here you'll see you've got the Merkava facing you. You've got a Namr troop carrier that has a population of 12 in it, driving in behind it as part of the convoy that the fighter said that they identified. Again, the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance has been impeccable all through this war. So that's the rear of the Merkava. You can see that because you can see the chains. Those chains are protecting the turret gap at the back, which is the largest. And you can see the double detonator there, and the fighters can set these as tripwires, but the fighters don't. They want to press the button. They want to be involved in pressing the button. In many cases, in Jabalia camp, where this operation is, the fighters have been waiting for this battle. In between the battles, they've been waiting for it to happen, and they want to be participating. They don't want to set tripwires. They set them in buildings, but you see them consistently wanting to participate in them. And you can see the fighters sometimes talking to each other about whether to set a tripwire or press the button. The guys always say, "No, we're going to press the button." Number 6 is a sniper operation. This is by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. I'm going to bring you resistance videos from all factions fighting in Gaza this week. And this is the Nidal al-Amoudi battalion of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. And you can see the sniper picks up an Israeli soldier there in the distance. And again, I've edited this out to match community guidelines that YouTube has. So you're not going to see the shot, but it is a successful shot with the Al-Ghul rifle, which is a copy of the Sayad 50 cal or the Austrian Steyr. And you can see these fighters here, again, working in teams, a spotter and a shooter. And there's the ambulance taking away the soldier that dropped in that successful operation by the Al-Amoudi battalion. So Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades getting involved. This is another 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞 operation. This is a sniper operation east of Gaza City that takes place. 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞 is using an Al-Ghul sniper rifle here. We're at 6B. And again, you see the fighters with their setups inside the building, nothing sticking out, nothing shiny. Anything shiny is covered over. And you see them identifying here. This is Israeli soldiers in the buffer zone. So the reach of this weapon into the buffer zone, again, I edited that because we can't have the soldier drop, but he drops, and it's a successful sniper operation by 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞. So Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞, both with successful operations. There you can see the wall. So part of the ceasefire agreement is Israel will withdraw into the buffer zone, and that buffer zone will be 700 meters from the border until phase 2. And you can see they're well within range of that weapon. So number 7 is another return to sender operation. And this is what you're going to see is the next generation of fighters in Gaza are going to be armed with Israeli unexploded ordnance or captured weapons. These are anti-tank mines that the Israelis use to blow up houses. They use it for house demolitions as a cost-effective way to carry out their genocide, cheaper than airstrikes. You can see they have eyes on this position here. The fighters said that they've had eyes on this position for 2 weeks, which is, again, something the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition, as the NATO militaries call it. That's certainly target acquisition, because you're going to see the arm of a soldier inside this troop position. And the Israelis claimed 3 dead in this operation and 9 injured, 5 critically wounded. Presumably in this operation, it matches the day and the location. This is in Jabalia camp. So reusing these weapons that have been used to devastate the Gaza Strip and applying it on the forces that are besieging them. So another return to sender operation by Soraya Al-Quds. Number 8, we're in Beit Lahia. Again, they're able to fight in all of these areas that the Israelis are operating. You can see what looks like a newly manufactured Tandem 85 warhead, which is Soraya Al-Quds' primary anti-tank weapon. You can see staring down the barrel of the Merkava tank here in Beit Lahia. And the Israelis said the Israeli army, this is from Mariv newspaper, that says the Israeli army, this is from interviews with soldiers, the Israeli army is struggling to deal with the large number of explosive devices in Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun. The Nahal Brigade and the 401st Armored Brigade operating in Beit Hanun for the past 3 weeks are paying a heavy price, with more than 40 injured and 15 killed. The army estimates that fighters have been preparing for a long time for the forces' advance into Beit Hanun and planting devices. So that's significant, because I've been talking about this throughout the war, that these fighters are not running around all over Gaza attacking where the Israelis are. The fighters are fighting in territorial divisions. So the Beit Hanun battalion, the Beit Lahia battalion, there's 2 battalions in the Jabalia camp and 2 more in the city of Jabalia. And they stay in those positions. So for 100 days, or for 95 of the 100 days of the siege of the north, Beit Hanun wasn't involved in the fight. The Israelis weren't pressing into Beit Hanun. For 95 days, they were focused on Jabalia camp and Beit Lahia. The day they moved into Beit Hanun, they were immediately hit. Within hours, they had 7 casualties from a significant operation. And so not running around and moving from place to place. So Beit Hanun exacting a significant price. And last week on the show, I showed you captured drones, new drones that were that we hadn't seen before, that were put in place by an Israeli Flotilla 13 Special Forces unit that was supplying troops with drones that made it appear as though they had run out of drones. I think we might have lost Tamara briefly here. Let me just double check. Oh, there we are. So this is, again, so now we're seeing back to back, seeing this drone, this Mera, they're calling it a Mera Pro, but it's actually a drone that's put together piece by piece. You can see the Velcro on it. And on that screen, it noted that this was a multi-mission capable drone that has communications and GPS scrambling capabilities, that it is capable of intercepting enemy drones, and it was carrying 1,000 grams. You can see in those lung-looking things are 500 grams each of high explosive of C4. They're the lungs on the right-hand side there. And you can see those are the same drones I showed you last week. And that was the first sighting of them last week that we saw them. We saw them in Rafah, and there was a whole table full of them there. And now we're seeing them here. This is presumably in Khan Yunis. And the fighter says, the commander says that through a precise and complex security operation, we managed to thwart a hostile attempt against a displaced persons camp with this drone. The aircraft was found to be carrying explosive pods, each weighing 500 grams of C4 material. The explosives have been, they commandeered the drone in the air and took the explosives. And Soraya says the explosives have been transferred to the specialized units of Soraya Al-Quds to be utilized in the field. So return to sender. So these drones, that we've only seen for a week in battle are already being captured at significant rates that seem to demonstrate, and I said last week on the show, because it's hard to know what the advantages of these drones are over the DJI, the G Chinese drones that the Israelis have been using. Possibly we're seeing it here, that it can carry a kilogram of explosives, but we saw those drones carry a kilogram. We've seen those drones, the G drones, carrying the sharpshooter weapons to use them as, and they've seen them, of course, Nora's reported on those drones carrying speakers. So it's not clear what the need is for these new racing drones that you can see the battery pack on the back is velcroed on. So this is done by a veterans organization that is seemingly giving these drones into the soldiers because they need them. And I speculated last week because it wasn't clear what advantage these drones have over the other drones. In fact, they have disadvantages, that it suggests that maybe the Israelis are running low on their supplies. And people had asked me all through the war, are the Palestinians running low on supplies? And these drones seem to suggest that the Israelis are. We'll have to keep watching for it. But again, this commander, the head of military intelligence, commander in the military intelligence, is describing on scene what I said, that they commandeered the aircraft, they took the explosives, and the aircraft was on its way to attack a displaced persons camp. So the cowardly Israeli army putting explosives on a homemade drone to drop it on people's tents 460 days into their genocide, that they have gotten $23 billion just in this year alone for weapons to drop on Gaza. But that's not enough. They want to make these makeshift drones. And again, you can see those are the two lungs that carry the explosives. So interesting detail. If the war is ending, I'm not sure we're going to get a satisfactory explanation for what we're seeing here. But those are clearly makeshift drones, racing drones, that don't have the same capabilities as the drones that they were using previously. If we look at the next slide, Tamara, number 10, you can see again another haul, and those are the Mavic. Those are G drones. Again, and you can see the size difference there. The blue one is the racing drone that the Flotilla 13 Special Forces gave, and you can see another one captured there. That one looks like it was shot out of the air. You can see the blades are broken, but the one in the previous video was landed, and the one in the videos that I showed you last week of those drones, they were all in pristine condition. The Palestinians GPS spoof and then land the drones. But here you can see that one was shot out of the air. You can see it's got no rotors on it. But yeah, this is a very interesting development. So we saw it in Rafah, and here we're seeing it in Jabalia. These are captured from Jabalia. And on the drones here, the drones show the soldiers, and they all smiled. I edited it out. But if the Hind Rajab Foundation wants their full faces, they should get them, because these soldiers were joking around, and they're all around their weapons, and they're going into Gaza to drop bombs off these homemade drones. So this is part of the digital footprint that these soldiers have created that has made it difficult already for them to travel. We're already seeing reports in countries of Israeli soldiers fleeing arrest warrants in those countries. And if there's a modicum of justice, that will be happening for years to come because of the crimes they've committed in Gaza. So just a note on Beit Hanun, there wasn't actually any videos out of Beit Hanun this week. They may come in the next week, but the Beit Hanun battalion was so ready. The commander of the battalion is Abu Hamza Fayed. He's survived the war and carried out his duties in the north in the Beit Hanun battalion for this whole time. Channel 12 Israeli television had a military embed because they thought that they had this area under control. So they were sending military embeds. I reported on that last week in Jabalia camp, where they sent Haaretz newspaper in. So Channel 12's correspondent goes in and he starts to talk to soldiers. Let me read you what he says. Testimonies from soldiers in northern Gaza. He says, the soldiers say, we are fighting in an environment monitored by cameras by the militants. They have planted explosive devices in every alley and are activating them from inside the tunnels. Their underground network is fully operational. We cannot see them with the naked eye. For a week and a half, there has been no direct identification of the militants. They have completely planted Beit Hanun with huge amounts of explosives and remnants of our Air Force bombs. Every alley, every intersection is filled with state-of-the-art cameras, 360-degree thermal cameras. They choose their targets carefully. They monitor the movements of our forces through the cameras. If there is a drone, they do not activate the bombs, but they wait for the military force to activate them. So the soldiers that went into Beit Hanun and they took admitted to 15 casualties just this week alone, and multiple high-profile ones that they couldn't hide. And it was the Gaza division that initially went into Beit Hanun thinking that it was going to be an easy operation. They immediately got smoked, and the 162nd Division had to come in and replace them, and they got hit just as hard. The Sayeret Nahal, the spearhead company of the Nahal brigades, they lost 13 of 17 soldiers in their company, including the company commander and his deputy who would have taken over. Both of them were killed. And the Nahal brigade's overall commander, their brigadier general, the overall brigade commander, was a narrow miss in an attack on the command jeep. And it was a jeep in a convoy. And that's why you get these testimonies from these soldiers, because there was a convoy of jeeps, but the Palestinian fighters, Qassam, hit the command jeep, not any of the other jeeps. And so their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is just all over these guys. And because they're not running around Gaza, they're in Beit Hanun, in the place where they live, where they grew up, where they know every area. They could be patient. And because they can be patient, they can wait 5 days, 6 days, and watch the Israelis get comfortable in these areas, and then they get hit. So like I said, the Sayeret Nahal spearhead company lost 13 of 17 soldiers, dead and wounded. That's dead and wounded. There was multiple days with dozens of casualties reported. One day there was 30 casualties reported, 13 critically, and like I said, at least 15 killed in this week. So, and we know Israel lies about their casualty report. So just remarkable fighting. And here's a report from Yedioth Ahronoth in bed that says, fighters and officers report that the operation in the north of the Gaza Strip is not being managed properly. The size of the forces was less than required, and they were not sufficiently equipped with heavy machinery. The Nahal Brigade, they acknowledge, is an issue that has not been sufficiently addressed. The fighters are exhausted. They've been fighting continuously since October 7th, and the results are evident. The war is not being managed properly to desired outcomes. They're losing the war. They don't want to fight it. Their military can't keep up with the tempo of the resistance, with the preparation of the resistance in this tiny besieged territory with no resupply lines, building their own weapons, are making soldiers have testimonies like that, where its enemy, the Israelis, have supply lines all over the world, as Shir pointed out, are sourcing weapons from all over the world, are getting $23 billion just this year alone from the Americans. And so this is just a really remarkable story. So that's northern Gaza. And I just have a few from the Netzarim corridor, which is also part of the withdrawal here. If we look at map number 15, we were lamenting the expansion of the Netzarim corridor under the ceasefire agreement. That is the ceasefire agreement of Yahya Sinwar. The Netzarim corridor will be abandoned by the Israelis. People will be allowed to return to the north without inspections, which was the criteria of Sinwar. And that has happened in part because the Netzarim corridor has been under fire by the Palestinian resistance every single day since it was established, and even before that, because the Juhar al-Dik axis was one of the first axes to get resistance, and that's where the Israelis came across the border to try to hold the Netzarim corridor. Was the source of the first operations of this war. So number 16 is, and again, I'm going to get everybody in here. Every faction's going to get in here. This is the Popular Resistance Committees and the PFLP, the Nasser Salahuddin brigades and the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades. And there's a trophy 60 millimeter Israeli mortar here that they're going to fire. The sign says, "We do not surrender. We win or we die." And the second sign notes the date of the operation and their flags. Again, Popular Resistance Committees and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, both groups participating together in mortar operations that look small, but these are essentially fragmentation grenades, bombs that are being sent that are deadly, and the Israelis have to set up installations to protect against that. So you can see them both there. And then number 17, we have so those you can see there just before we switch, those are Israeli mortars. So number 17, again, this is the Popular Resistance Committees and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Also, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Martyr Omar al-Qassam forces participated in striking the Netzarim corridor this week in an operation with Saraya al-Quds. Saraya al-Quds, multiple operations against the Netzarim corridor. As well in there. These are 107 millimeter rocket artillery. Again, they've seen these being fired all throughout the war. They'll be fired right till the last day. When the Israelis moved into Beit Hanun, all of these launches were from Beit Hanun, right under the Israelis' nose. So 17B is the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. So the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades are involved in this with the Popular Resistance Committees as well. And they've put the Netzarim corridor under pressure for this entire war. And the Israelis want no part of keeping it in this ceasefire. They intended to keep it in the ceasefire agreement. There's more, you can see there, more captured Israeli mortars. So these fighters are capturing the mortars and returning them to sender still. And again, the fighters acknowledging that it's victory or martyrdom. They're fighting to the end. They do not surrender. They will not surrender. And that has been going on throughout this battle. And the launchers as mortars. And you can see in other videos where they set up their mortars. They're not just random. They're doing it. They're using artillery geometry, artillery math to set up their firing positions. And because the positions of the Israelis are fixed, the fighters can move their positions and still have the coordinates for hitting the Israelis. And number 17C, just two more here. We got this is the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade's Nidal al-Amoudi battalion, and you can see here how they set up the coordinates using the string line and the geometry from their artillery math, and then they set it up. So this gives us a good shot of all three parts of the operation that we usually see. And this is an operation dedicated to Nidal al-Amoudi, who was assassinated by the Israelis along with senior Saraya al-Quds commanders in a targeted assassination in the Shati camp on 14 January 2008, exactly 17 years ago to the date. And you can see the sign there that they've put up to commemorate this. The sign says, "Abu Hassan, you have planted." It says, "Within your memory is a promise. We will stay on your path. You planted men who are protectors of the nation, and your memory in us is our resistance." And so they set this up for, this is the Al-Amoudi battalion firing, and you can see the landing there. They have a spotter. A lot of the mortar teams don't have their spotter. They don't want to give up their spotter position, which is why we don't see the other side of the mortars. And just one more, 17D, this is Saraya al-Quds and the Jihad Jibril brigades. This is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, PFLP-GC. So we haven't had the Jihad Jibril brigades in for a while, but this last series of operations, we've brought in every resistance faction that's in the joint operations room. And maybe during the ceasefire, I'll show you some videos of the joint operations room training before the war. These guys did not just wake up, roll out of bed, and learn how to fire rocket artillery and use their geometry to get on target. They trained, all the factions trained together under the lead of the 𝐓𝐶aM brigades. And we've focused on the 𝐓𝐶aM brigades throughout this war because they are effectively the national army. And these other brigades are in support and work under the umbrella of the 𝐓𝐶aM brigades. So that is the resistance report for day 468, 4 days before the ceasefire goes into effect on Sunday, as is scheduled. Hopefully that is the case.
Thank you so much, Jon. God, so much. We've learned so much over the past 16, almost 16 months about the capabilities and about the resilience of the fighters. And yeah, just thank you. Thank you, as always.
Thanks, Nora. I appreciate that.
And
yeah.
One thing, there were clips yesterday, and I'm sure we'll see more of this when the ceasefire takes effect, of resistance fighters in the streets of Gaza yesterday with the people being carried on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And it just shows how much this resistance is part of the people that they are defending and fighting for, and that the whole strategy, the Israeli strategy of brutalizing and murdering the population to try to turn them against the resistance, just what an utter depraved failure that is.
Yeah, the fighters are heroes, and the children, they think that, but the children themselves are heroes. They've lived through the worst hell that you could imagine, and they came out on the other side victorious, like Ahmed said. You have an entire generation of Palestinians who came out through this and are stronger for it. The trajectory of the state of Israel coming out of this is I think this is not the last we're going to hear about resistance from Gaza. And I'm going to, do you want me to set up the ceasefire? I'm going to set up the ceasefire right now. And I will say that the goals, I'll start with what the goals of the Israelis were for this war. Number one, the war, the violence, the genocide was supposedly to put pressure on 𝐓𝐶aM to surrender and turn over the prisoners. So return the captives, failed. Destroy 𝐓𝐶aM, that was goal number two. Clearly failed, spectacularly failed. Even Blinken said the other day, speaking before the Atlantic Council, that American intelligence says that 𝐓𝐶aM is bigger today than they were before the war. And I think that's an obvious statement when you kill people's families in the way that that they've done, and people have watched and want to be a part of resistance. They want to be a part of the liberation. I have no doubt that they're larger than they, even by the inflated numbers that the Israelis give, they're larger. So number two was to destroy 𝐓𝐶aM. Number three was to destroy the Hamas government. That failed as well. There's still administration in the Gaza Strip. The government of Hamas is able to negotiate for a prisoner exchange. They're able to manage the environment in Gaza. The healthcare system has been reestablished. The education system is resisting. The civil defense operated throughout the war, so failure on that. And number four, that Gaza is no longer a threat to Israel. Gaza now has 70,000 tons of explosives dropped on them with a 5% dud rate. They have explosive munitions for 2 generations of war against the Israelis, and they have a population that is enraged and believes that they can win wars. They believe they can blow through the border, attack Israeli military bases, withstand the genocide that the rich Western world backed against their tiny enclave, and they came out the other side. So failure on all the Israeli goals of the war. The conditions of the ceasefire that Yahya Sinwar set at the beginning, the conditions never changed. Number one, end of the aggression, not phases where the war goes and you get prisoners back and then you go back to war. No, an end to the aggression. That was the deal had to include end of the aggression, withdraw from the corridors, Philadelphia corridor, Netzarim corridor, that's number 2. That must happen. Number 3, a return of all Palestinians to the north. The Palestinians must be returned to the north. They're not being trapped in camps in the south, even though that's the primary goal of Israel. Hamas refused that. People will be allowed to return to the north, that there would be a prisoner exchange, and number 5, reconstruction and an end to the siege. Because the end of the siege is part of the ceasefire. As Yahya Sinwar said, the siege is warfare. You don't continue. The ceasefire agreement has to lift the siege because the siege is war. So there's no ceasefire with a siege. And that is Sinwar's principles. And those are the principles that were agreed to. As Maureen accurately reported at the Electronic Intifada in her article, we haven't seen the final printed deal. It's still being, it hasn't been finalized. They're still talking over points. But we know, and even Biden said yesterday, that it's word for word the same as the May 27th agreement. And we know a lot from that agreement. It is that all 4 of Qassam's principles, all 4 of Yahya Sinwar's principles are true. End of the aggression. Phase 1 deals into phase 2, deals into phase 3, but all of them are built together and they all are premised upon an end to the aggression. Israel cannot go back to war and get their soldiers back in the second stage. So stage 1 of the deal is essentially the humanitarian aspect of the November 2023 exchange, that Israel didn't give Qassam time to find the other prisoners. So these are the 33 prisoners that are in the humanitarian exchange. At the time, Qassam was giving them for 3-1, 3 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Israeli prisoner. Now, because Abu Ubaidah said right from the start that if you go back to war, the price for these prisoners will never go down. It will only go up, and it did. So in the first stage of the deal, these will happen out over each individual release, 1 per day. And on the Israeli side, there's 33 Israeli captives that will be released. And on the Palestinian side, 2,000 prisoners. That includes the bulk. The bulk of that 2,000 is the people captured in Gaza, who were never charged, didn't have anything to do with anything. They were marched in their underwear out of shelters where they were with their families. They didn't have anything to do with anything. And Israel took them to brutal torture camps. Those people will be released. They were used as bargaining chips. Withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor in phases. Withdraw from the Netzarim corridor in phases. The first phase in the first week is to move off the coastal road, Al-Rashid, the coastal highway. That will allow Palestinians to move north on foot. So that is a key part of this deal. The other part of the deal is 10 hours of no overflight of Israeli drones, and no overflight for 12 hours a day during the exchange. That's critical so that Qassam can find the prisoners without giving up their positions and have Israel renege on the ceasefire and massacre them. So that's necessary to get Israelis out. And then, of course, as Nora reported, the surge of humanitarian aid is supposed to be 600 trucks a day, 50 fuel trucks, half of them to northern Gaza every single day. And that's surge. And then there's some small details like 200,000 tents. That's because this deal was done in April and March and finalized in May. So 200,000 tents were necessary at that time. But 9 months of genocide, that number is going to need to go up considerably. It's 60,000 mobile homes. And the immediate rehabilitation of electricity, health clinics, hospitals, and bakeries. So that's all going to happen immediately in stage 1. Stage 1 is 42 days. but it can be extended, because at the end of stage 1 is the negotiation for stage 2. Stage 2 is when the soldiers are released. And that is where there is still back and forth about the names of people to be released. So the stage 1 of the deal is 33 Israeli captives for 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, 250 of them with life sentences. And just to note, Sinwar said that these people could go back on October 8th. If Israel wanted, they could have taken all of these humanitarian people in the humanitarian release. They could have taken them all back on October 8th. They could have done that, and they didn't. They could have taken them all in November if they had have extended the November pause for a week and allowed Qassam to find those people. They didn't do that. And as a result, many died. Many were killed by the Israelis. But now the exchange, instead of 3 for 1, it's thousands, and it's 250 prisoners with life sentences. So core cadre of the resistance who have been in prison, and Israel expected prison to be their grave, like Yahya Sinwar, who was released in the Shalit deal, are going to come back to Gaza. And that's a significant accomplishment of the resistance as well. So those are the main deal as far as we know it. There's a Hebrew version, an Arabic version, and an English version that all match on the May 27th agreement. And it's the basis of the agreement that went to the UN. Was it the Security Council? I think it might have been the Security Council.
The one that the U.S. kept vetoing. Linda Thomas Greenfield, her legacy.
But then ultimately there was one that Biden accepted, and that's the one where he had the ice cream cone and microphone, and he thought there was going to be a deal. So this is just really, it's grotesque that this deal was done last year, and the Israelis carried on with 9 more months of genocide, and in the end, they have less of their people to bring home. So it's clear that the goal was genocide, not bringing their people home.
Yeah, of course, as it's always been.
And a big aspect of this is, and I'm going to talk more about Donald Trump's involvement, but this is confusing a lot of people, and they're saying, well, we can't trust this, it's a ruse, why would Donald Trump insist on this? And I get why people say that, but you have to always look at fundamentals, which is Israel threw everything it had at Gaza, not just everything. Israel had everything the United States had, and they failed to break the resistance. And not only did they fail to break the resistance, but look at the Israeli press today talking about how the army is broken. There's a big story in Haaretz today by Dalia Scheindlin about how the levels of mental trauma, absenteeism, family breakdown among the reservists. People just don't want to come back. The army is broken. And Abu Ubaidah told them this would happen right at the beginning. He told them, this is what's going to happen to you. You're either going to be killed, or you're going to go back with lifelong physical disabilities or mental disabilities. And it all played out like Abu Ubaidah said. So they couldn't keep going. And then you take all the economic and social aspects that we touched on in our discussion with Shir Hever earlier on. And I've heard in the past few days people giving me all these, it's a ruse, and they're going to go back to the war after phase 1, and it's all a stitch up between Donald Trump and Netanyahu. And this sort of talk frustrates me, I have to say, because we are robbing the resistance and the people of Gaza of their achievement. And they did come through this, and they came through this at a very high price. And particularly the children, who are going to need a great deal of care, of psychosocial support. They're going to have tremendous trauma, but the Palestinian society in Gaza did and will come through this. But to really get a sense of the scale of Israel's failure, read the Israeli press, because they are saying it. And just one example, and this is not the only one, is this article in Haaretz today, which is headlined, "How Trump Scared Netanyahu into Accepting a Ceasefire Deal with Hamas." And this is by Amos Harel, who is, one of their hard-nosed military guys. He's not a leftist. He's not Gideon Levy. And what he says in this article is that after the war, I'm just going to read a few bits. It's a long article. Hamas is in a better position to take control of civilian affairs in Gaza and gradually rebuild its military strength. So there, confirmation from a hard-nosed Israeli military intelligence type correspondent guy that Hamas is not only not destroyed, it's going to recover its strength, and it's still the unchallenged ruler inside Gaza. Then he says the Israeli public will be surprised when it finds out what the person who says he wishes to be remembered as Israel's defender, in other words, Netanyahu, had to concede during the negotiations. It's not just control of the Philadelphia route, but also the Netzarim corridor, including the ability to genuinely monitor the return of over 1 million Palestinian civilians to northern Gaza. He also agreed to allow the entry of 600 trucks with humanitarian aid per day, 100 more than the daily average before the war. And then it says, during the months in which he rejected the plan, which had already been proposed last May by the Biden administration, Netanyahu is mainly worried about his radical right-wing allies Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who threatened to dismantle his coalition. It now appears that Trump left him with no other choice. We'll talk about that. And then there's this sentence, which I just loved. Some of the prime minister's blind followers are going through a painful sobering up these days. Trump is not an admirer of Israel or Netanyahu. So this is, of course, all counterintuitive, because we were told for months that, however genocidal the Democrats are, Donald Trump is going to be even more genocidal, whatever that could possibly mean, given the hell that people in Gaza have gone through and are still going through. So I guess I want to talk about why Trump would be doing this.
I think that part about Hamas being in a position to control civilian affairs in the Gaza Strip now is so key, because how long did we hear for the past 15, 16 months? How many Western politicians did we hear saying, even Bernie Sanders said something along these lines, that Bernie Sanders said, you can't have a ceasefire with Hamas in place in the Gaza Strip. All these European politicians saying that Hamas can play no part in the future of the Gaza Strip, and so on and so forth. In the texts of the leaked texts of the agreements that are going around, that are being distributed about the ceasefire text that has been discussed in Doha, there's no mention of that. There's no mention of Hamas withdrawing or ending civilian rule. So it's very clear they're going to be still in place again.
And there's nothing, of course, about Hamas disarming in the agreement. But of course, Asa, you can't have a ceasefire without Hamas in place, because who's going to implement it? Who's going to organize the return of your hostages and so on? And I just want to remind people what Netanyahu said in Congress in June when he got, 57 standing ovations. He said that the war in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders, disarms, and returns all the hostages. But if they don't, Israel will fight until we destroy Hamas's military capabilities and its rule in Gaza and bring all our hostages home. That's what total victory means, and we will settle for nothing less. That's what Netanyahu said. So by his own standard, this is a complete defeat for Israel. Now, let's talk about why Trump would put pressure on Israel and what that means and how Trump did it. And I guess the first thing I want to do is remind people is that on, I think it was January 7th, Trump posted this video of Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs on his Truth Social website. And let's actually watch the clip, Tamara. It's a short video, but this is what Donald Trump, the incoming president of the United States, posted on his social media account.
Syria, and you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on, these are not even sensible terms.
So that was posted by the incoming president of the United States. That's incredible. Incredible if you think about it. And Netanyahu said nothing about it, not positive, not negative. But that video, the fact that Trump posted it, caused shockwaves and fear in Israel. Because what this does is it sends a clear message that don't count on unconditional support from the United States. Don't think we're going to fight your wars. Now, does that mean I think that Donald Trump is definitely not going to do something stupid like attack Iran? No, that's not what I think. But I think it creates enough uncertainty about his position that if you're Netanyahu, you can't confidently count on Donald Trump to back you up 100%. And in a sense, that's the genius of Donald Trump, is that he leaves us all guessing. We don't know exactly what he's going to do, and therefore there's a lot of power in that. So when he sent his advisor, Steve Witkoff, his envoy, to arm twist Netanyahu and tell him, you're going to do this deal. And some more reporting came out today from Axios that said that Steve Witkoff went over and told Netanyahu, after saying, I don't care about your Shabbat, get over to your office. And Netanyahu, like a good boy, came down to his office on Shabbat, just like he was told to do. But Witkoff apparently told him that Donald Trump is serious about this deal, don't mess it up, which means that Trump and his people know that for the past year, Netanyahu is the one who has been sabotaging these deals. And I want to get into the the why I think Trump might be doing this more in a moment, but I think it's very important to say at this point that we said right at the beginning of this genocide that it could be stopped with one phone call from the President of the United States. And this is essentially that one phone call that proves that that was always the case, and that this act that the Democrats put on, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Tony Blinken and Linda Thomas Greenfield and the other blood-soaked war criminals put on, that, oh, we're working tirelessly for a ceasefire and that we just have to convince the Israelis to come along, was always BS. They could have stopped this.
And that Hamas was the one holding up the negotiations over and over and over again. We heard Tony Blinken say, we're waiting, the ball is in Hamas's court. They refuse to come to the negotiations table. It's, or their demands are preposterous and ridiculous. And, and as we said at the time during those instances, that this was complete BS, that it was Israel always refusing to do the right thing, that it was Israel and the U.S. ensuring that this genocide, that this Holocaust could be continuously perpetrated without any repercussions, or without any justifications, completely in flagrant violation of every single humanitarian international law on the books, and that Israel could again do what it wants because the U.S. lets it. We actually have a clip. Maybe this is a good time to go to that clip of our friend Max Blumenthal challenging Tony Blinken at the U.S. State Department today.
It's good a time as any.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic clip.
And Sam Husseini, our friend, the reporter Sam Husseini, also did the same thing.
100 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu.
We'll have the time to take questions at the end.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have the time to take questions
Your
at the end.
Your father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
Thank you.
You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
Please, sir, respect the process.
Respect the process. Respect the process. While everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ is saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague? Why are
I just look at, sorry, that was Sam Husseini. The first one was Max Blumenthal. The second was Sam Husseini. Now imagine if that was at the Kremlin, and all those American journalists, all those obedient scribes of the legacy pro-government media would be screaming about press freedom in Russia and look how they treat journalists in Russia. They all sat there in silence as their colleagues were being dragged out for challenging a literal genocide. It's so disgusting, but it's so satisfying to see Antony Blinken and these other war criminals challenged to their faces like this. And they're asking the right questions, the questions that nobody else in the so-called Washington press corps bothers to ask or dares to ask is, there was a deal in May. Why did you pretend that Hamas was the ones blocking it? Everyone knows that's a lie. Genocide was their choice. Genocide was their policy. And they used the cover of negotiations, as Asa called it, a ceasefire process, to as a cover for their genocide, and they planted fake stories in the American media, which the New York Times and the Washington Post dutifully ran, about how angry Joe Biden was with Netanyahu in private, and he was calling him, using bad words against him. Utterly disgusting. And they are now exposed by Donald Trump, who picked up the phone or sent his envoy over and said, you're going to stop this now. You're going to sign the deal that you refused for the better part of a year. And Netanyahu said, yes, sir, I'm going to do it. And all the reporting in the Israeli media, we've had these last minute glitches yesterday and again today, and now the cabinet is delaying the vote. The Israeli media see right through it. They're saying, oh, this is all Netanyahu acting out to the end to pretend that he is in control and that he is fighting for every last concession, whereas the reality is he is not going to dare defy Donald Trump. Now, the question is, why is Trump doing this? I've had lots of people saying to me, Ali, that there's no Trump has no sympathy for the Palestinian people. I don't assume he does. He's never really expressed any sympathy for Palestinians. He hasn't in his statement since the ceasefire deal has announced. But what do we know about Donald Trump that's consistent? And I discussed this in the article that Tamara just put up, that we published the other day, is that Trump has expressed, as we saw with the Jeffrey Sachs video he shared, this impulse against the endless wars, not because he has great sympathy for the targets of U.S. imperial wars, but because he sees these wars as draining the United States and costing the United States. In his first term, he was a complete failure at stopping any of these wars. And in fact, he contributed to the situation now by, among other things, ordering the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in Iran, and of course, supporting Israel to the hilt, which is why this is now so surprising. But what is consistent about Trump is that he doesn't seem to have to put any value on so-called US allies. He doesn't care about NATO. He's hostile to NATO, and he's hardened that position. In his first term, he was saying they have to reimburse us and pay up 2% of their GDP. He's raised that to 5% now. He's saying NATO countries have to pay the US 5% of their GDP, basically, or increase their defense spending, which would all go to US military industrial companies anyway, mostly. And he doesn't care about Germany, which is supposedly the bedrock of the transatlantic relationship. And he doesn't care about Canada, the largest US trading partner with the longest land border between any two countries. And he's prepared to, he's saying we'll cut off the trade with Canada. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. He's insulting Justin Trudeau as the governor of Canada. In other words, as if it's already the 51st American state. So that's what's consistent about his worldview, is that he doesn't put any value in these relationships that he doesn't think directly benefit the United States. So if that's the case, the question I would ask is, why would he care about Israel, which is a tiny country, a massive drain on the United States? According to Jeffrey Sachs, and in a video shared by Donald Trump is dragging the United States into these wars that have cost literally trillions, have cost the United States literally trillions. And Israel, he looks at that and he says, well, we've sent them $25 billion just since October 7th, and
they can't
Joe
win.
Biden wants, sorry?
And they can't win.
And they can't win. And Donald Trump, there's one thing he hates is a loser. He likes winners. You know,
Right.
that's the type of guy he is. And Joe Biden wants to give Israel another $8 billion on the way out. So that's why I'm not so surprised by this. And his approach is, well, if we're paying your bills and there's no one's bills is that the United States is paying more than Israel's, then you do what we say. And the implication of this also is it shatters the myth that the Israel lobby drives things. Trump may be a singular figure in a sense that he has the political clout to do this. And I think one indicator is, I looked at this, take the most fanatical pro-Israel person you can find in the United States Senate, someone like Lindsey Graham. You can't find anyone more fanatically anti-Palestinian and genocidal than Lindsey Graham. If this deal had been the same deal had been imposed on Israel by Joe Biden back last year, Lindsey Graham would have been screaming bloody murder. He would have been saying, we have forced our ally Israel, who we love more than life itself, to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorists. And it's a disgrace that Joe Biden has done this. Well, guess what? Lindsey Graham loves this deal. And he's only mad that the Democrats are trying to steal credit from Donald Trump for this deal. So to me, that's a significant indicator that the politics around Israel are capable of changing surprisingly quickly. Now, does that mean that I think everything is going to be rosy, that Donald Trump is going to be a great ally of the Palestinian people, that he's not going to take measures that are incredibly harmful to Palestinians? None of that. But for the moment, this is where I think things are, and things are contested and contestable. And it is not a given anymore that the United States is just going to be in lockstep with Israel, especially after this catastrophic last 15 months, which, even if you disregard the suffering of the Palestinian people, have done nothing for the United States, nothing for its influence in the world, nothing for its hegemony, nothing for its economy. Nothing good has come out of it, even from a purely American nationalistic perspective.
I think that's the key point, really, is that this is contestable. And if there's one thing that you can say about Donald Trump is that he has, unlike Antony Blinken, who's clearly a fanatical Zionist, and unlike the sort of desiccated husk of whatever's left of Joe Biden's brain, who Donald Trump doesn't have doesn't seem to have an ideological commitment to Zionism. As you were saying, he likes winners, and Israel is increasingly starting to look like a loser. And it's and you've talked about this, Ali, you talk about this in that article. There's this shift we've seen really in the last year or two on the right in the United States, where there is no longer complete lockstep unity in favor of Israel like there used to be. There is increasingly more voices on the right in America who are more skeptical of Israel. And in a way, I suppose that's kind of similar process to what happened in the US in the Democrats over, a far longer period. These things are contestable, absolutely.
Yeah, and then one sort of last point I want to make on this is people are saying, oh, well, yes, but Trump wants to, he wants the Gaza thing to stop because he wants to push forward with normalization, with restoring the Abraham Accords and so on. In fact, he says that himself in a post on Truth Social that he put up after the ceasefire deal was announced. And he said, with this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of the special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build up the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords, referring to the agreements that normalized Israel's ties with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. And of course, the big prize here, supposedly, is Saudi Arabia. And there have been, murmurings and rumblings that that's what he wants to do. And what I want to say about this is all of that may well be his intention. There's nothing in there that sounds great for Palestinians. He doesn't talk about Palestinian self-determination or even a Palestinian state. He doesn't mention it at all. So this is not an ally in that sense. But the point is, America's plans don't necessarily go to plan. What is it that the resistance fighters say? They plan and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of plans. They plan and God plans, and God is the best of planners. Well, we can paraphrase that a bit, that America plans, but America isn't always the best of planners. My point is that the Abraham Accords were already in place when Trump was president last time, and that didn't stop October 7th. That didn't kill the Palestinian cause, as they hoped and intended it would do. And just adding Saudi Arabia to the list, a country that has done nothing for the cause of liberating Palestine, and formalizing a relationship with Israel that it's already had, really doesn't change the equation. So that may be their intention, but what the last 15 months have proved is that no scheme, no group of collaborators, no set of Arab tyrants posing for photo ops with Benjamin Netanyahu, none of that will make the central question of Palestine disappear. And the option, Israel, this was the thing that hung over everyone, that Israel could go in and just, they believed they could do it. They believed they could go in and destroy Gaza and topple Hamas. And they went in and they certainly committed a genocide, but they didn't topple Hamas. They didn't destroy the resistance. And the resistance still has its weapons. And this is crucial because a deal like this doesn't depend on trusting Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu. It's why the resistance insisted on structuring it in phases so that they have leverage at every step if Israel decides to renege on the deal, which is a very high possibility because that's what Israel does. And even if we get through all three phases and then Israel decides to reinvade Gaza or whatever it is, the resistance still have their weapons. And so that's where we are. I just want to say all that because really this is an achievement of the resistance. And that achievement has even changed and affected politics within the United States. And we should not approach this as everything is a foregone conclusion. Everything is an American secret plan that is going to be rolled out just as Donald Trump wants. That's not the way things work. It's not Donald Trump and the United States who make history and write history. It is the people of the region who write their own history.
Yeah, and like you've been saying for a long time, Ali, they don't have magic bombs, They've bombed Gaza to smithereens, and yet the people are still there, the fighters are still there, and they're still carrying on. That figure that John mentioned earlier, I found so striking, of the 5% dud rate of the Israeli bombs. How, you know, and John saying that it's enough for 2 generations of munitions. You know, we know that the Palestinian fighters have these homemade munitions. We've seen it all in so much detail, documented by John. It's not over. Like, to say the least, it's not over.
No, and it's clear that
they're the seeders of their own downfall.
That's right. And it's clear that the Palestinian resistance in that tiny little strip of land, you know, what is it, 5 miles by 3 miles at its widest, has completely changed the world. You know, this is a major, irreversible shift, not just in the dynamics of power in that region, but the impact that the Palestinian resistance has had on U.S. politics, on U.S., you know, on the consciousness of people around the world, and especially in the Western countries. And you know, we are remarkably lucky to be able to witness that kind of change, and it has come at an unimaginable, unspeakable cost to the Palestinians. And this is not, you know, the first time, obviously, that Palestinians have endured such terror and slaughter and unmitigated violence by state actors. You know, but it is just an incredible, you know, feat of defiance and of strength and of resilience. And, you know, I think we all have to, as you said at the beginning, Ali, like, we have to remind each other that if the ceasefire is implemented on Sunday, and if the phases of the ceasefire take place in the way that they're supposed to, and as Palestinians begin to rebuild Gaza, and as the liberation struggle continues politically, that we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, even more so during this process. And you know, we're not going anywhere, Palestinian anywhere, and this fight continues.
And I just want to add one thing, Nora, that I think is important. We can't let our guard down. You know, they are going to, Trump himself promised that they're going to come after the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States and on the campuses. And they will do that. His administration is full of fanatical Zionists who are going to use whatever position they have to advance the agenda for Israel. So, you know, maybe some of the big picture things are not going to be exactly what Israel wants, but they're going to push back everywhere they can. Israel is fighting for its life, and we've seen that it has no red lines. So I don't want people to be complacent. I don't want people to think they're rosy. But there are opportunities here. The price people have paid in Gaza has affected people all over the world, and opened minds and opened eyes and ears to the reality, and more people are willing to join this struggle. And we have to make sure not to lose that momentum, not to let attention drift away. We have never, you know, at the Electronic Intifada, and I read a beautiful statement today from the American Friends Service Committee, the Quaker organization. Maybe Tamara, I don't know if you're able to get it up, but it was just a wonderful reminder. I think I put it on my Twitter account earlier too, that our solidarity, this ceasefire is, here it is. This was just a great statement. Ceasefire is the beginning, not the end. And this comes from the American Friends Service Committee, which has been present in Palestine, working alongside Palestinians since the Nakba. and have been doing tremendously important work with the on Gaza over the last decade, campaigning against the blockade for more than a decade in the United States and raising awareness. And it's because of that groundwork, I believe, that so many people were mobilized during this genocide. So we have to keep building all the way. We can't let our attention, our solidarity, our determination slip. That
right.
is the one thing I really want people to take away from here.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, you can always turn your attention to the Electronic Intifada's website. We have incredible features, analysis by our writers in Gaza and by our staff editors. There's Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor's analysis of the ceasefire deal there on the front page. We have features from our writers in Gaza who are reporting on what their family, their community, their neighbors are saying about the ceasefire deal. I read a part of Malik Hijazi's piece that's there that we just published, I believe, Tuesday. Incredible features that we will continue, obviously, to keep publishing. And we aren't going any. I mean, this is just the beginning. This is the next phase, and we really appreciate everyone who's stuck with us so far, and keep supporting this kind of work. So next week, of course, we'll be back, same time, same place. We have a really fantastic guest. I won't even tease it because I don't want to jinx it. But it's going to be a fantastic show, as always. Be sure to sign up for our email list. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're on all the platforms, of course. If you are inclined and are able to donate to keep this publication and live stream running, go to the top of the website, click donate now, or follow one of the links below here in the YouTube. Thank you to Tamara Nasa for production and direction of this live stream and all of the videos that are going to come out of it. Ellie Gerzon for the social media. Thank you, Ellie. Maureen Claire Murphy, Michael Brown, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, all of our listeners, viewers, and supporters. On behalf of myself, John, Asa, Ali, and Tamara, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
From